if you listen to his work, it's not revisionist history. He's basing it on.
Would you know, you bald monkey? How would you have any idea? Like,
I'm a free American. I can talk about what I like.
We're not talking about whether you can do it, you slimy worm. Oh, God. Oh, he's such a mollusk. Such a writhing mollusk. This guy's spine is a noodle. You don't think he's offering anything controversial or like revisionist, but you also don't think he's an expert. Why do we care about this person? Unless it's because he appeals to the kind of dribbling, insecure, narcissistic, watched The Matrix once and it ruined his entire life. Wet pants head here, Dave Smith. Because he appeals to you. He appeals to the kind of person who just is so desperate to know something that the experts don't.
The goal of this is every time I see people that disagree with anything that's happening, any gigantic world events, it's one of these retarded shows where they're screaming. There's the word again. We brought it. Yeah. We were just talking about that.
You did it early.
The word retarded is back. And it's one of the great culture victories that I think is spurred on probably by podcasts.
I'm so sorry.
These things are always like Pierce Morgan-y, which is fine.
My fault?
You know, where everyone's screaming over each other and there's 5 different people talking over each other. There's never just rational conversations where you discuss things. True. And I respect both of you. I think
Gear up for some rational conversations.
I bet you agree on a lot of things, and I bet you disagree on a lot of things, and it'd be fascinating to see your perspectives on this. So that's why you're here together.
Okay.
And
well,
Douglas,
can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Since the war in Israel began, and since the war in Ukraine began, you've had quite a lot of people who are very against both in different ways.
Yes.
Do you think you've had enough people on who are supportive of either war?
I don't know that word enough, if that's a good word.
Let's say
the answer is no. The answer is no. The answer is that Joe Rogan's go-to people are anti-Semites and people who love Russia. That's that's the correct answer there. That's the shortcut to what Rogan's trying to say. That Rogan has a natural preference. His boner points in the direction of Vatniks and anti-Semites, anyway.
Let's say enough people who are on the side of Israel instead of wild critics of Israel.
Well, I've had a few. I mean, I believe God Sad is on the side of Israel.
For sure.
Jordan is on the side of Israel.
You had Mike Baker, Coleman Hughes.
Yeah.
Coleman did it for like 20 minutes. It wasn't why he was here.
No. I mean, none of them. And none of them is why they're here. You know? It's a good question.
Do you think you've tilted one way?
Do you think Rogan's an anti-Semite? No. No, I think he just loves conspiracies. And then some of those conspiracies are anti-Semitic. Does that make him anti-Semitic? Probably, maybe, I guess, by extension. But I don't think it's like the motivating reason for him going into this conclusion. Speedy Taco, thanks for the $5. Happy Easter. He has risen and so is our Hasbara agent. True, that's me. Ew.
Way.
Me personally?
No. Just with the guests you've had.
The guests? Yeah, probably more tilted towards the idea that perhaps the way they've done it is barbaric.
But why do you think that is? Just out of interest. I'm just interested in your selection of guests because you're like the world's #1 podcast. So
yeah, it's not. I don't think about it that way. I just think I'd like to talk to this person.
But can I just? Sorry, it's your show. But
sure.
If you're going to interview historians of the conflict or historians in general. Why would you get somebody like Ian Carroll?
Yeah, but Ian Carroll, I didn't bring him on for that purpose. I brought him on because I want to find out, like, how does one get involved in the whole conspiracy theory business? Because his whole thing is just conspiracies.
Sure.
You know?
But do you have any, I mean, there's been a tilt in the conversation, in both conversations.
Douglas is probing really early in this, isn't he? He's already starting to poke. The question you should ask is whether or not Joe has an agenda. Like, when you pick guests, are you trying to promote one agenda over another? Do you feel like you're obligated to represent two sides of a conversation equally? Or, what are you doing? What are you playing at? What's going on in that baldy little head of yours?
And it's largely to do with people who have appointed themselves experts who are not experts.
You mean like Ian? I don't think he appoints himself an expert in anything.
Who's that other dude who thinks he's an expert on Churchill?
Oh, Darryl Cooper
Darryl.
does not think he's an expert.
In fact, I think.
Yeah, why did you take him on to talk about World War II? Why was he the guy that you wanted to talk to? Is it just this like, oh, if it's alternative, I'm more interested in it? Like, cringe. It's very cringe.
Everybody else is always calling him an expert, and he's like, oh, I'm just a history.
Have you
nerd."
ever absorbed any
It's also
of it?
this thing is like, they're going to do even what Dave was saying there, because everyone calls him an expert. And it's like, okay, well, is he an authority? He's clearly an authority in some parts of the internet, like the alt media space, like the Rogan space. Yeah. Because they thought that what he had to say about Hitler and World War II was worth more than any actual historian who's got like a good reputation on this topic. I don't know.
His material, have you ever consumed any of his podcasts or anything like
I
that?
tried.
Yeah?
It's pretty hard to listen to somebody who says, I don't know what I'm talking about, but now I'm going to talk. Or I don't know about this. Or I'm not capable of debating this historian, but I'm going to just tell you what I think.
Yeah, but that's not
I think that's a
exactly
little
that's
bit
not
out of
exactly what
context.
Darryl was saying. I mean, Darryl's point of view, however you feel about this, what Darryl is saying is he doesn't really like doing debates. He likes to do long format stuff where he can really explain his position.
If you throw a lot of out there, there's some point at which I'm just raising questions is not a valid thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're not raising questions. You're not asking questions. You're telling people something.
Do you think Darryl's doing that?
Yeah.
I think there's a whole bunch of guys doing that.
Well, to be fair, Darryl does actually just try to say what's what, doesn't he? More than just asking questions. He'll just say, yeah, Hitler tried to call off Kristallnacht when he heard about it, which is not true. But okay. Yeah, Dave Smith is just such a disgusting prick. He's he's just the perfect example of like backs the off when he knows someone knows more than him. Like, has clearly learned a lot of things, but like has a very childlike way of processing information. Like everything he says when he talks about either Ukraine or Palestine, it's all just like summarized into a collection of quotes that are used to push a particular story. And usually the context of those quotes or what they actually mean and the time frame that they came from means something very different to what he's trying to communicate. He does this very fast and loose thing with like, well, that person's not an expert, but also they do a of research and you should take their opinion seriously. He defends the out of this Darryl Cooper person, but then also admits that he's completely out of his depth on every single specific argument about World War II or Hitler or Churchill. Just makes him untouchable, really.
I
think Dave is doing that, very obviously. Dave's a comedian, but he's now mainly...
Yeah, but he didn't tell any jokes. He's a comedian. He doesn't even tell any jokes.
Talking about Israel.
No, I don't know if I'm mainly talking about Israel.
That's all I see you on the internet.
I don't know if that's all.
That might be what you've seen.
It's
but
just
I don't
you
think that's
But that is also your shtick now, isn't it?
Well, what do you mean by that's my shtick?
Well, you're not a geopolitics guy in general, are you?
I don't even know exactly what you're asking.
I'm saying...
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. What do you get invited on to Piers Morgan for? To tell jokes or to talk about geopolitics, you invertebrate? Like, why is he doing that? Why? Why do they do that? What is this whole, like, I've been doing this thing very confidently and loudly and brazenly, but then as soon as someone asks you and starts to probe you a little bit, it's like, oh, I don't really even know what I'm doing. I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't even know what you mean by, am I a geopolitics? I don't know what you mean by me being a geopolitics guy. Like, it's, oh God. It's, the first time I think I ever saw this was Lance from the Surfs, because he used to always, like, he would appeal to authority like he would cite all these expert opinions. This is what all the academics say, and this is what all the human rights people say, whatever but then he would always back the off when he was called out to, listen, I'm just a clown on the internet. Like, oh God, why? These defense mechanisms, like, what are you trying to do? I'm just a guy who tells jokes on the internet. Like, no. You want to be taken seriously or not? What are you? What's your purpose? Can I just, like, people like Dave Smith, right? He's the kind of guy that I just want to get him somewhere. I just want to get him and just be like, listen, mate, like, just, what stays in the speakeasy stays in the what. You are just everyone about, aren't you? Like, mate, you are just like taking the piss. I don't know.
You've decided, being a comedian, you've decided now to become somebody who talks about Israel and the conflict.
I think you're incorrect. I don't think it's a decision. I just think you have long-form conversations, multiple of them. It's a huge event that's in the news, so it comes up. I don't think it's a thing. I think if you're on the outside, you'd say, oh, look, they're trying to get attention by talking about this very polarizing issue publicly. That's
but you do get attention from that. If you'd spent the last year speaking about Myanmar, you would not be on my lips.
Yeah, but he does talk about Yemen constantly. He talks about a lot of things that aren't in the news.
Well, I tend to talk about the
How is Yemen not in the news? Yemen is in the news, Joe. What? Yemen is in the news. How many? The Signal group chat, that was about Yemen. There was literally like headlines because the American government leaked themselves sharing plans to bomb Yemen on a Signal group chat and invited a journalist in by accident. And sent compromising information about the strike before it went out. There's a whole thing about it. He's already forgotten about Signalgate. Oh no. Who was in there? Tulsi Gabbard? JD Vance? Pete Hegseth? Yemen. Not in the news. What?
Conflicts that my government is directly involved in, which I think is reasonable to me. But I don't quite get, like, what's all the appeal to...
Yeah? Where your government's directly involved in. Has Dave Smith ever said a word about how USAID being cut has resulted in like 80% of the emergency medical services in the emergency, who are they, the emergency food suppliers in Sudan are on the chopping block now. They're done. In a place where there's a famine going on. We're going to talk about that. Because not only is that something the American government is involved in, it's also something that is unconstitutional. It's also something that the courts are against. It's also something that that Dave Smith supports because it's from the government that Dave Smith preferred over the Democrats. Okay.
Authority stuff. I mean, what you have to be an expert, or
no, I think
what exactly
authority
makes you an
I think
expert?
authority matters, and I think that if you just throw a lot of shit out there and then say I'm not interested in the alternative views on this, and particularly when it's a counter narrative that is wildly off. And when you get people, look, I just feel we should get it out straight away. I feel you've opened the door to quite a lot of people who've now got a big platform who have been throwing out counter historical stuff of a very dangerous kind.
You mean Darryl? Are you talking about Darryl?
Darryl, who's the other one?
I don't think Darryl has.
Derek.
I don't think there's anything dangerous about
what's the other
what
guy? Derek.
I mean, he just whitewashes Hitler's entire story in World War II. That's probably a big issue.
What's his name? Cooper, is it? Which one is it?
No, that's
it's Darryl
Yeah,
Cooper.
Darryl
But who's the other one?
Darryl.
There was one I just checked on the way here. Darryl Cooper, and then Darryl Cooper, Ian Carroll. Look, these guys are not historians. They're not knowledgeable about anything.
No one's calling Ian Carroll.
No, but then why listen to their views on Churchill?
Darryl is incredibly
listen?
knowledgeable.
It's not.
It's just
He's not.
Hey, he's not an expert. He's just incredibly knowledgeable. So we should just treat him with all of the same credit. Fuck me. It's so interesting that people like Dave Smith, like they use all of their qualities and all their like skills, and it's all devoted to just evasion rather than actually presenting your worldview. It's so weird. Like, I wonder if the reason these guys have such takes is because they devote like 50% of their time to just impression management rather than actually trying to advocate for your cause. Yeah, it was for USAID, by the way, in Sudan, it was between 70 to 80% of the emergency food kitchens in Sudan that were shut down as a result of the government's decisions with USAID. And that's where like there's a famine going on, like IPC standard of a famine. Okay, that means that for every 10,000 people, there are between 2 and 4 people dying every day of starvation or related disease in Sudan. And that's an American decision that has decided to shut down 80% of the emergency kitchens that were set up there for people who are suffering as a result of the civil war. But why? But that never comes up. America actually has, it's interesting because in Sudan, America actually has more of an impact in reducing human suffering than they do in Israel and Gaza. They do. Because that USAID thing is literally a drop in the bucket. It doesn't involve any major policy change. It doesn't involve twisting the arms of any other government or anything else. It just involves reinstating USAID so that they can get those kitchens back up and running for like a fraction of GDP of the federal budget. But they don't give a fuck about that, I guess.
Yeah,
He's not.
Why do
He's
you say
wildly. Several reasons. One is when he was offered to debate the current greatest living biographer of Churchill, he said, I can't, because he knows much more than me, and I admire his work and I've learned from it, but I can't possibly debate him. That's Andrew Roberts.
Right, but you don't have to be able to debate people to have opinions.
No,
on
you
things.
don't have to debate people.
If
But
it's not your thing.
But if you, for instance, well, okay, but if you say, I've decided that Churchill is the bad guy in
It's not
World
what he
War
said.
II.
It's not what he said. It's not what he said.
Neither Carroll nor Cooper have said that.
Well, listen, I don't know what Carroll said, but Darryl Cooper's not said that. What he said was he jokes with his friend Jocko, who's an Anglo-Saxon. He jokes with him.
This is one of those jokes where you go on to defend the position, but then also say it was a joke. But for those of you who don't know, Darryl Cooper's position on Churchill is that he thinks that Churchill and his decisions and his warmongering are the reason that the war didn't end much sooner than it did. He thinks that Hitler made peace overtures to the United Kingdom that should have been accepted, and that would have cut the war massively short and maybe even avoided the Holocaust, right? That was the idea. The problem is that one, Britain was already at war when Churchill became prime minister, okay? Germany had already declared war. Britain and Germany were already at war over the invasion of Poland under Chamberlain, okay? So there already is a war. It's not like Churchill dragged the UK into a war, as Darryl Cooper puts it. Second of all, there's no indication at all that any acceptance of a peace deal from the United Kingdom towards Germany would have stopped Operation Barbarossa, which was obviously Hitler's main goal, and his main romantic ambition was to seize the living space for the Aryan race. It also completely ignores the fact that Churchill was not unique at that point in wanting to reject Hitler's peace offers to the United Kingdom. By that point of late 1939, early 1940, even people like Halifax were more or less on board with the idea that any peace deal with Hitler cannot be trusted. There is no point, because Hitler will if you give him an inch, he will take a mile. If you make a concession to Hitler, he will only ever use it as breathing space to take more from you afterwards, like he did with the Rhineland and the remilitarization, like he did with Czechoslovakia, like he did with Poland. So why would you? Stupid.
I think that Churchill was the secret villain of World War II. And what he's saying is, by Churchill's actions, the war escalated.
Which actions?
He's not saying anything.
He's not just asking questions, then, is he?
No, but
he's got a
the
point of
claim
view.
isn't that he's just asking questions. Yeah, he has a point of view.
You can explain
just ask one of them to explain why. How is it Churchill's actions that escalated the war? Did Churchill force Hitler to invade the Soviet Union? Was there something special about Hitler's offers to Britain that were different from the offers he had made in terms of the militarization of the Rhineland, or with the Anschluss, or with Czechoslovakia?
Is better. He literally says
yes, he
he's
said
joking.
in the comment, he goes, listen, I'm being hyperbolic. And then he once again disclaimed, he goes, and I'm not claiming Churchill committed the most atrocities or was the worst part. But in many ways, I do view him as the chief villain, as my hyperbolic, provocative statement. But
what's
Douglas,
the point of that?
Well, okay, but Pat Buchanan wrote an
What is the
entire
point
book
in
on
that?
this. Is he not allowed? Is he not an expert? Is he not allowed to be
He's
interviewed?
certainly not an expert. He can be interviewed. I've watched Pat Buchanan debate. I watched Pat Buchanan debate against Churchill historians, and he was absolutely leveled because he doesn't know what he's talking about.
When did Pat Buchanan debate and get
That was
leveled?
about 20 years ago.
I'm just
he
curious. I
debated
haven't seen
against
this.
Andrew
I
Roberts.
feel like I watched this debate must have been like 18 or something. Yeah, fuck. I don't remember how it went. Completely wiped from my brain. I just remember that it exists. There was that and like Chomsky Buckley or whatever. Yeah. Pat Buchanan. Bro.
Roberts and several other historians at Intelligence Squared in London. I was there. He didn't know what he was talking about. He had a contrary view, and it was interesting and stimulating to hear. But if you only get the contrary view, which is, isn't it fun if we all pretend Churchill was the bad guy of the 20th century, at some point you're going to lead people down a path where they think that's the view. And that's...
How do you conclude Churchill was the warmonger? The argument goes that Hitler's attitude towards, say, the French and the British was very different to his attitude towards the Russians, right? Or to Slavs or Jews. Little statistic, I think out of all the prisoners that the Germans took from the Red Army, 58% of them died before the end of the war. So 50% of Red Army POWs died because they were killed or left to starve or succumb to disease under Nazi custody. By contrast, I think towards the end of the war, only about 2% of French or British POWs died in German custody. So Hitler, the way he saw it, had like a bit more of a sense of respect for the British Empire. Like he had a level of admiration for it. He still obviously wanted a lot of concessions from the United Kingdom, but the argument that they used to make Churchill into a warmonger is that they just assume, for no reason, that Hitler's peace overtures to the United Kingdom after he had taken over France were sincere. That the Brits should have made peace with Hitler in 1940, and then that wouldn't have resulted in... And then had they done that, then Hitler would have basically lost his mandate to invade the USSR. Because it is true that Hitler did think that if he was going to invade the USSR, he had to do it before the war against Britain was finished. Because he thought that if they had achieved peace, it would be very difficult to justify bringing the country back into war. Whereas if they were still at war, they could justify attack on and just frame it as defense. So basically the argument is that Churchill should have believed Hitler. The counter argument is that by this point, even the people who supported appeasement had realized that appeasement was not going to work. So it's just is what it is. And you know who proves that more than anyone else? Is the Soviet Union. Because the Soviet Union, just before Operation Barbarossa, who were already supplying the Nazis like obscene amounts of their raw materials through Molotov-Ribbentrop, accelerated that. They gave the Nazis even more. They sped up the amount that they were giving to the Nazis as part of the MR Pact to avoid Barbarossa. And it didn't work. So basically, at every turn, Hitler basically said loudly and clearly, I am unappeasable. You cannot take my word for anything. You cannot accept my overtures for peaceful solutions because they are going to be lies, because we're going to take more than we say we want. That's it.
Of the most profound kind.
I don't...
Interesting and stimulating to hear. But if you only get the contrary view, which is, isn't it fun if we all pretend Churchill was the bad guy of the 20th century, at some point you're going to lead people down a path where they think that's the view. And that's of the most profound kind.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what he's trying to do.
I think that's exactly what they're doing. And the problem is that because your own platform has come about because you're...
The thing is as well, though, is that Darryl Cooper is very good at picking his battles when he's on these mainstream shows. Because I do consider this mainstream compared to the crazy Nazi fucks that Darryl Cooper is actually appealing to. Because when you pick your battles like this, to someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, like Joe Rogan, and to someone who is very vulnerable, to someone who tells you they're about to drop some different truth to what you were taught in high school, he can get away with just dropping these little bits of counter narrative into World War II, and it doesn't really look like he's doing anything that obscene. So a really good example of this was when Darryl Cooper was telling Joe Rogan that Hitler downplayed his anti-Semitism. Which is true. He did at some point. He downplayed it in the late 20s because they were trying to consolidate conservative votes. But he elaborates on that by saying that Hitler downplayed the anti-Semitism for optical reasons all the way through Nazi rule in Germany as well. And that when Kristallnacht happened, he said it was entirely Goebbels' idea, incited by Goebbels, but Hitler tried to call it off because he thought it looked bad. Not because he cared about the Jews, but because he looked bad. That's Darryl Cooper's version of the story. Now, that doesn't really sound all that offensive. Like, it could be that, like, if you knew what you know about World War II just as a layman, okay, maybe Hitler wanted to cancel Kristallnacht because he cared about the optics. Okay. But the problem with that version of events is it's just not true. And it's easily demonstrably not true. According to every like diary account from the time, Hitler was completely behind Kristallnacht happening. There's no evidence that he tried to call it off. The evidence that that people used to say that he was trying to call it off was from a pretty high up Nazi official who only started to say that after the war ended, when they were at Nuremberg, because they tried to shift the blame off of Hitler because the guy was a loyalist, right? I can't remember his name, but it was a Hitler loyalist who basically at Nuremberg argued that Hitler had tried to call it off. But if you look at the record from the time, this same person was actually involved in Kristallnacht and was enthusiastically involved. So it's just a bad source. It's a completely unreliable source that contradicts every other piece of circumstantial evidence from the time. So the reason that that's more egregious than it sounds is that he's trying to get a foot in the door to launder Hitler's reputation, to make it sound like because if you think that Hitler wanted to call off Kristallnacht for optical reasons, well, that makes his anti-Semitism just sound a little bit more toned down, right? Like, if he's actually willing to spare the Jews for good propaganda, that seems like he values the public image more than he values his hatred towards Jews. But that's just not true, right? Actually, Hitler's irrational hatred of Jews went far further, as we know now, than allowing Kristallnacht to happen. So it's just, but that, again, is Darryl Cooper stealing that bit of history revisionism from David Irving. That's where he got it from, because David Irving made the exact same argument with the same sources. But if you just heard that version of events as a layman, you wouldn't really think that much of it because it seems plausible, which is why it's so egregious. It's a way to get people to get their foot in the door, to be like, to launder Hitler's reputation and just outsource all the undeniable shit to people like Goebbels and Himmler. That's how they do it.
Very successful comedian and much more. And you do ask questions.
Insidious.
And you are interested.
It's insidious.
But there are a lot of people who have come along, partly I think because they've come on this show, who have come along and they've decided, I can play this double game. On the one hand, I'm going to push really edgy and frankly sometimes horrific opinions. And then if you say that's wrong, they say, I'm a comedian.
But wait a minute. No,
how can you tell me I'm just a comedian?
Well,
I'm just throwing stuff out
What
there.
horrific opinions that's wrong are you talking about specifically?
Once guys like this get into very obvious stuff, which is
guys like Darryl,
the ones I'm describing.
You
very
need to
clear.
listen to Darryl to really understand what he's saying. If you take Darryl's words out of context, Darryl
out of
has
context.
some of the most nuanced, balanced, and charitable views on all the figures in history.
Well, particularly Hitler, it seems.
No, you're wrong.
Yep. I do wonder how. The shame that Douglas Murray couldn't even remember Darryl Cooper's name before he went into this conversation. We'll see how it goes. Speedy Taco. Oh, sorry. Hack Yaring. Thanks to the tier 1 sub. Really appreciate it. He loves jacking off. Wow.
You're wrong.
Crude.
He doesn't. What did he call him? How did he describe him?
I think he compared him to a methed out psychopath who was holding an entire nation of people hostage, I believe was the way
He also
put it.
said on here that he wasn't anti-Semitic.
Even that though, like he was a methed out psychopath. That's not like. It just makes it sound all the less. It's not accurate. Hitler didn't do what he did because of meth. Okay, first of all, he was in a cocktail of what I believe was the equivalent of mixing cocaine with heroin, or is it meth and heroin? I don't know, some shit like that. But that's not why he did what he did. He did what he did for very clear and very well laid out ideological reasons. Like, it was a fundamental it was fundamental to his belief system why he did what he did. Like the invasion of the Soviet Union was fundamental to his belief system because he thought that Germans had a right to that land and that everyone else had to either be subservient or they could starve out or flee. That's it. And with the Jews, he fundamentally believed that wherever they were, they would be an enemy. They would always be an enemy to the German race, and that's why they had to die. Like this is not just this. It's not like he just took meth and just started rambling. Okay.
I believe was the way
He also
put it.
said on here that he wasn't anti-Semitic until the Holocaust. There were no speeches of Hitler's in the 1930s.
No, again, this is
No.
Listen,
Is
man,
this on your show?
No, he said he was not public about it.
he said he was downplaying it to win over. He said there was a
Yeah.
period where he was downplaying it to win over popular support in Germany.
Yeah.
That's true, but that's like late 20s and that's it. That's not what he's doing when he's in power. In the late 20s, anti-Semitism, which was still part of Nazi messaging, just took a back seat because it was easier to win right-wing voters by talking about the fear of communism or instability of the Weimar Republic or the Treaty of Versailles. Like these were the things that would get voters, okay? Not anti-Semitism. But that's only late 20s. I think when I was hearing Darryl Cooper talking about it, he's trying to extend it all the way up to like Kristallnacht, which is 1938. Okay.
It was his argument.
There is no historian of World War II who thinks that Hitler was downplaying anti-Semitism in the 1930s. That was what he
30s,
was doing.
okay.
He wrote a book about it in the 1920s. He got to power on it, and he grew his
Yeah,
power.
in Mein Kampf, he is very anti-Semitic. Yeah, to the point where I think is it in Mein Kampf where he says that if more Jews had died in World War I, then the defeat would have been worth it. I think that's in Mein Kampf. He said that.
On the back of it, the idea that you can argue that in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler was downplaying the anti-Semitism, like there's no historian who would agree with that. So why would you throw out the idea that in the 1930s, Hitler was not being anti-Semitic in public?
They're going to have to be specific about the 1930s here because it would be 33 onwards when he was going more mask off. But I don't know. I feel like obviously Joe and Dave just don't know anything about that. But yeah, who knows?
That was what he was doing in public. He announces to the German parliament what he wants to do.
Yeah.
So when you're throwing out claims like he was keeping it down in the 1930s, first of all, what are you doing? And secondly, why?
Why indeed?
I mean, I think that it's kind of hard because I don't even know exactly what Darryl's point on that was. And so I'm not really in a position to argue.
Why are you defending him then? Dave does this all the time. He defends Darryl Cooper like he's his mother, but then it's always like, oh, I don't really know what he was saying with that particular issue. F off, man. Oh, I hate him so much. He's such a slimy scum of the earth. Oh God. Because if this is like, again, and you know that Dave Smith, if you want to talk about Russia, Ukraine, or like Israel, Palestine, he's always got some quote from a 5-star general from 1993 about how someone did this. He's always got that like in his back pocket. But for this, it's just like he's just defending this guy for his own sake. Like, why?
What he was saying there, I don't think you're giving him the most charitable interpretation.
Wow.
I don't need to give him the most charitable interpretation to be able to see
Okay,
what
I think you're
he's
straw
doing.
manning him, I should say.
Look, anyone can look up what he said on this show and others.
Wait,
What-
how do you know if it's a straw man if you don't actually know what Darryl Cooper was saying, Dave Smith? Dave, he's just gaslighting him. Dave is abusing poor Dougie here. Poor Dougie Murray. It's so funny that no matter how someone's views are, because Douglas Murray has some pretty nasty views on Muslims, especially when it comes to immigration in Europe. Like he's a conservative. He's a giant conservative. It's so funny how even people like Douglas Murray, any Englishman, okay, no matter how racist or how they are or how bad they are with trans rights or whatever, if someone attacks Churchill, okay, they will become the most based soldier of the truth you'll ever see on the planet. They'll become such an ally overnight. God damn. Thank you for being English, Churchill.
What these two guys in particular have said on repeated podcasts with both of you, it's an attempt to downplay Hitler and always to do down Churchill.
I don't think he downplayed Hitler.
You're saying I've
whatever way they
downplayed
can.
Hitler?
No, I said in conversations with you.
Oh, he just needs
and
one example. He needs the exact. The Kristallnacht example is perfect because it is downplaying. It's completely downplaying. Come on.
others. This is the shtick of these guys. They've decided it's edgy and funny, and I think this is very, very interesting and also very dangerous because we live in an era now that the right has got some mojo back in America.
Mojo.
We saw years of crazy left overreach where they tried to make us all say the craziest thing and completely predict.
What about trans rights? Are you talking about competing in female MMA? Yes. I don't like Douglas Murray because he doesn't think that I should be allowed to call myself Lonerbox and start scrapping with 4'11" damsels.
There are now figures on the right playing with really dark and ugly stuff on their side.
I agree
and
with
they
that.
are mainstreaming
I don't
this,
think
and I
Darryl's
think it's
doing that.
partly being mainstreamed by the two people I just described. And both of you have kept speaking to these people, and you don't get on the historians who know about this.
Yeah, why not, Joe?
That's just alarming to me.
Well, can I just say, so because I kind of do agree with part of what you said there. Like, I do think it is true that almost as a reaction to like the woke insanity that we've seen on the left, and I think nobody's been a more effective critic of that than you. I do think there has kind of been a right-wing reaction that has embraced racialism and is dangerous and not a good path to go down.
And now they're flirting with Holocaust denial and Hitler and absolving Hitler of blame and much more.
I think you're wrong to include Darryl in that group. Now, the other thing is, I'm sorry.
God, what was the thing that Holocaust denial? What was the thing that Darryl Cooper said in on Tucker Carlson? I think it was Tucker Carlson when he was talking about how the way that he characterized the Nazi treatment of Slavic and Red Army prisoners. And he was basically saying that they went in there and they stormed through faster than anyone expected. And then suddenly they had all these prisoners and they just didn't know what to do with them. They're like, how do we feed these people and all that? And it was like, and that's kind of why so much of the death happened. Like it was just a kind of, they just found themselves in a situation that was like they couldn't navigate or couldn't prepare for. Like just I guess the random butterfly effect of the universe threw them into a position of having too many prisoners to feed. But that's not true. That's not even slightly true. Even before Operation Barbarossa, they're already talking about how Slavs are subhuman and should be, and like the concept of taking prisoners is going to be not taken that seriously. Like it was all ahead of time, which is not even to mention that by the time you're 1 year into the invasion of the Soviet Union, you've got the hunger plan, where they're literally expecting to starve out or ethnically cleanse percentages from each Eastern European country. And this is all in documentation as well. There were actually the policy of just like killing prisoners instead of actually keeping them as POWs in the Soviet Union was, it was rejected by like a handful of soldiers, but barely any. Like it was because it was policy. It was policy that most people didn't object to. That's like full on Holocaust denial, those guys. Yeah, the Einsatz group and like sending the fact that they sent in the SS like right at the beginning, that the SS were already running through the Soviet Union, rounding up Jews and killing them, and trying to make it look like it was locals doing it, and trying to, even though we know it clearly wasn't most of the time. I also, you know how tankies have like a huge beef with Baltic people, with Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, because apparently they accuse them of having like a huge number of Nazi collaborators in their population. Now, it's true that a lot of people in the Baltic states and in the rest of the USSR welcomed the Nazis when they arrived because they saw them as liberators. Actually, a not insignificant amount of Jews did the same thing in Poland. So, you know, they were proven wrong very quickly, is what it is. But the idea that people in the Baltic states enthusiastically collaborated with the SS when it came to killing Jews, that's actually not very well supported. Like people did, but it was only a very small minority. Only a very small minority of people in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia actually did help the SS with killing Jews. Like very, very few of them. And in all of these countries, the number of people who fought back against the Nazis and joined the Red Army was bigger. Like Ukraine, you know, people talk about Ukraine being a Nazi collaborator country and Bandera and shit. Well, you can look at the numbers. It was 250,000 Ukrainians who took the side of the Nazis and collaborated with them during the war. 250,000. 7 million Ukrainians were in the Red Army fighting against the Nazis. So I didn't actually know that the tankies had kind of like exaggerated that level of complicity from the Baltic states. Like complicity with the Nazis was much higher in places like Bulgaria and Romania, and to an even lesser extent Ukraine. But like the Baltics, for the large part, especially Latvia and Estonia, they were not nearly like as enthusiastic supporters of the Holocaust and attacks against Jews that people are trying to make them out to be. Lithuania maybe a bit more, but yeah, I don't know. What's your source for that? Them trying to make it look like it was the locals. That's from the Third Reich War. I think it's chapter 1 of the very beginning of the chapter on the final solution.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. You're saying people that I've had conversations with have downplayed the Holocaust. Well, who are the two guys?
I
Darryl
just told
Cooper,
you, Cooper and the other
Ian
friend of
Carroll.
yours, Ian Carroll.
I've never podcasted with Ian Carroll. I have podcasted with Darryl Cooper once, and he absolutely did not downplay any of the Nazi atrocities at all. And I think that if we're zooming out,
how would you know, Dave Smith? Every time you're challenged on World War II history, you yourself and say that you don't know what you're talking about. Like, how would you know that he wasn't downplaying anything? Because you don't know anything about World War II.
Here a little bit. Maybe this is kind of part of the disconnect. Broadly speaking, in American culture, the idea that it has not been driven into people enough that the Nazis were bad and that Adolf Hitler he is literally the modern devil. He is much more so than the actual devil. Adolf Hitler is what's viewed as the most evil thing, to the point that, I mean, just my entire life growing up, if there was a guy who sold soup on Seinfeld who was like authoritarian, he's a soup Nazi. Right. Everyone was Hitler. The left called George Bush Hitler, and they called Obama Hitler, and they called Trump Hitler.
So
every single enemy that we've gone to war with is always called Hitler. Saddam Hussein's the new Hitler. Muammar Gaddafi's the new Hitler. Putin's the new Hitler. It is so the idea that like we haven't driven into people enough that Adolf Hitler was a really bad guy.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying just as the left...
That doesn't mean you need to start saying things about him that are not true, though.
To play with very dark, ugly stuff. And they've done it for decades. They have played down Chairman Mao's murder of the Chinese throughout his era in power. They played down Stalin. They still march on occasion.
Another thing I didn't know... Fuck me, I read so much yesterday. I also didn't know that when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, Stalin very, very quickly deported, I didn't know there were this many of them. Stalin very, very quickly deported over 1 million ethnic Germans from the Soviet Union. So in the Soviet Union, there were a bunch of ethnic Germans living there. Now, a lot of them didn't even speak German. A lot of them were, they were ethnic German in the sense they had German ancestors. And Stalin deported over 1 million of them to Siberia. I didn't even know that. That's so many people. What the scale, bro? You're getting invaded, and you're like, listen, this guy's old man's a German. Okay, he might become a fifth column. Send them to Siberia. Get the trains. Me
with posters of Lenin. They've spent.
You thought Stalin had a breakdown when Hitler invaded, and the government wasn't functional for a while because of that. I believe it was like 2 days. So. The shelling started at dawn on the 22nd of June, about 3:30 a.m. It was the longest day of the year. Stalin was in denial of it. He thought that Hitler had been disobeyed or there was a coup or some shit. He eventually learns about it later in the day. I think it was on the 23rd when he basically pulled a 16-hour shift in his office, reorganizing the army and starting preparations and all that. But yeah, he did hole up in his, what's it called, his dacha, the little house that he had outside Moscow. He was holed up there for a while. But I don't think it was, people say it was like a month. I don't think it was a month. It was just a few days. Rearranging party messaging as well. They very quickly ditched pretty much all of their communist rhetoric during the invasion of the Soviet Union and changed it into nationalist rhetoric. So suddenly it was all about defending the motherland from the German invaders. And I think Pravda, the Soviet newspaper, changed their header from "Workers of the World Unite" to "Death to the German Invaders." So a lot of the turns out that Marxist-Leninism isn't that helpful when you're getting invaded. Yeah. He when he was holed up in his little house, a couple of people from the Politburo came to visit him, mostly I think to look for direction, and they found him just in his armchair, and he looked at them kind of like exhausted and weary and just says, "Why have you come?" And it turned out the people realized he had asked that because he thought that the people from the Politburo had come to arrest him. Like he thought he was getting cooed.
Decades trying to do down evils that were done on their side. And I would suggest that one of the things that is going on at the moment is, despite, or maybe because of what you just described, there are movements now on the right in America, subcultures, including people who follow both of you, who are very interested in playing with this absolute beyond the pale thing. Why somebody like Jake Shields wants to play around with Holocaust denial? Why?
Yeah, why?
I can't answer for Jake Shields. I don't know.
I don't even.
No, why
I
do you
couldn't
think?
even possibly know why.
I have no idea. I think
I'm telling
a
you,
lot of people get captured by audience capture.
Captured by their audience.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. You get a lot of
Yeah.
positive reinforcement.
Couldn't tell you what that's
from a
like,
bunch
Joe
of
Rogan.
Twisted people.
Well,
Yeah.
it's also, I mean, there's something about, Michael Malice had that great line. He goes, when you take the red pill, you're supposed to take one and not swallow the whole bottle. And I think there's like this dynamic. What happens is, and of course, people know the red pill is the analogy from the Matrix. The idea that you wake up to realizing that so much of the stuff you believed was propaganda and is all lies. And this is a real danger when the establishment and the institutions
It's the establishment's fault that It's the establishment's fault that we're platforming Holocaust revisionists and not even realizing it's happening because it's convenient that way. Yeah, it's the establishment. If only you hadn't been wrong. If only you hadn't lied about WMDs. I wouldn't have to platform a guy who gets all of his World War II takes from David Irving and never expose him to pushback from real historians. It's George Bush's fault that Dave Smith is a retard. Yes, thank you.
Hands down, having sold a bunch of very consequential policies based on lies. And then once people realize that, they go, well, what else have they been lying about? And then they almost
Why is he doing that, though? It sounds like he's explaining why it's irrational, but he does it. He does it all the time. Why are you doing that, Dave?
Want to look into every single thing and go, I think the whole thing was lies. Now, I agree with you. There's danger in that. And I think that there are some things that then people jump to conclusions that are totally wrong. But I guess I tend to look at that and go, well, then maybe the people with power, not random podcasters, but like the people with real power should do a better job of not lying through their teeth about everything.
Well, maybe you have power. Maybe you have power, both of you.
Yeah.
We live in an era where podcasters have
No. We're going to keep on platforming unqualified Holocaust revisionists until the establishment stops lying. And even when the establishment doesn't lie, we're just going to pretend they lied anyway, because that's what they do.
a lot of power. You go on a podcast with Jake Shields, and Jake Shields goes on to another podcast and says he doesn't think 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. What do you think's happening there? That's an exercise of power. Okay. And I agree with you about the breakdown of trust. Absolutely. We have lived through an era where, in real time, we saw something called a conspiracy, the lab leak, which turns out to be true, as you and others said it might be from the beginning.
I find that to be very racist.
I don't think it turned out to be true. I don't think the lab leak turned out to be true. I think it just turned out to be something that has not been ruled out yet. Isn't that it? Isn't it basically in the same place that it was at the beginning, where it was just like a not ruled out theory? Okay. Dougie. We need to get this back on Churchill quickly, because they're all gonna they're all gonna go on a vaccine circle tug now, aren't they?
And
both of you.
It used to be
it
racist.
used to be racist when we were saying that it was likely that the COVID variant had come out from the place making COVID variants.
Dude,
Especially
But
since
isn't it
it's
great?
You know, I think the racism was that Chinese people were literally being attacked because they were getting blamed for having for the China virus. That was why it was right anyway.
Just seemed like it.
Dude,
Seemed like it was possible to us.
By the way,
But the point,
Ask yourself this: who has access to your medical history? In theory, it's just you and your doctor. But in reality, hundreds of shady companies called data brokers are keeping tabs on every symptom you
Fuck
Google,
those guys.
every treatment you research,
Get 'em
and
out.
every pre-existing condition they think you might have. That's valuable intel for advertisers and insurance companies who will take any excuse to raise your premiums. But there's a way to get your privacy back, and that is with ExpressVPN.
Please skip. Excuse me. I will not skip ads with a very emaciated Super Chats goal. Okay? You got to respect the goal if you want me to respect your ad-free experience. No such thing as a free box.
VPN. With ExpressVPN, 100% of your online activity is rerouted through secure encrypted servers. This makes it impossible for third parties to invade your privacy. ExpressVPN also hides your IP address, which is the number used to identify you on the internet. Without your IP address, data brokers can't use it to track and sell your activity. Plus, ExpressVPN is easy to use. It just takes one click. And it works on all your devices, phones, tablets, desktops, even TVs.
It's not even your ad, though. Okay, let's just stall a bit more. Yeah, it's not my ad. It's just a means of coercion, is what it is. I hope you understand wasted design. It's your fault that this has been paused now, okay? That we're just sitting here waiting. I hope you feel guilty. If you don't, I might just wait longer. I might just scroll on my phone a little bit. What we got here? Oh, wow. Oh, tariff news. Oh, that's how they remove a molar. Wow. Oh, wow. Brian Tyler Cohen, Tommy Lahren. Wow.
And on up to 8 devices at the same time. This is why ExpressVPN is the #1 rated VPN by the experts at CNET and The Verge. And the best part? Podcast listeners can get 4 extra months of ExpressVPN for free at expressvpn.com/Rogan or by tapping the banner. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can get your 4 free months by scanning the QR code on screen or by clicking the link in the description.
I was referencing the New York Times calling the lab leak racist, which is just the funniest thing ever, that they go, it's racist to think that there was a sophisticated lab where they were developing like gain-of-function research. And they go, no, what happened is these freaks were eating bat heads.
That's
and
right.
you're like, wait, that's not racist?
pretty
The
racist.
other one was
They're
racist?
eating pangolins. Yeah.
But that one fell apart in front of our eyes.
Well, it
And
took
of course,
4
It
years.
took 4 years. And I've said repeatedly, it's kind of inevitable to me that if you see something that is called a racist conspiracy theory fall apart and become also what we used to call true in a few years, it's likely to blow a lot of people's minds. But the question then is, do you help those minds that have been blown blow themselves out some more by doing a whole load of other conspiracy stuff? Do you decide to go, hey, what else have we been lied to? Maybe Churchill wasn't a great guy.
Yeah, but these guys don't think they're doing conspiracy theories. They think that they think Darryl Cooper is just a guy who. I love how on the one hand he's not really saying anything controversial at all, and he's not downplaying the Holocaust or anything like that. But also he's here to tell us what the mainstream is wrong about. But like, what though? What's the alternative take here? Really, what's he contributing? Wasted design. That's why it's for the gifted sub. Really appreciate that. Wow.
Maybe Hitler wasn't such a bad guy. Maybe the Holocaust, et cetera, et cetera.
Nobody
And that is
is saying that.
exactly
No
what
one is saying maybe Hitler wasn't such a
You
bad guy.
are saying that.
No
if you're
one's saying
saying
that.
that in the
You're doing-
1930s, Hitler kept the anti-Semitism down.
No, that's not what he's saying. What he was saying is that he didn't do it as publicly. He was doing it in meetings because the support for that kind of thinking wasn't as ubiquitous as it was.
When? During the Nuremberg laws where they were stripping the Jews? That was 1935. Are we talking about like this one window, maybe between like 33 and 35? Let me have a look, actually. Let me see if there's any quick timeline on it. I'm trying to think what Hitler was doing between 1933 and 35. There was the anti-Jewish boycotts. They didn't really work out very well. And anti-Semitic legislation. Nuremberg was 35. Well, in Dachau, you already had concentration camps in 33. You had, and a lot of people who were rounded up there were Jews. Yeah, no, there were already anti-Jewish laws going in 1933. They banned Jews from editorial posts. Okay. Some Jews were stripped of their citizenship. They were forbidden from the bar for practicing law. They were removed from government service. Jewish doctors were suspended. This is all 1933, bro. When is this? Are they talking about like 1931 to 32? Is that okay? Golf.
I've seen this before. I know exactly what these guys are drinking. They're drinking a couple of very, very discredited historians like David Irving, and they are just regurgitating it. And it was always been the same thing. It is always an attempt to minimize Hitler's anti-Semitism actions. Eventually down the road, you get to minimizing his actual involvement in the Holocaust. And then you can go on to the next stage.
Yeah, but you can't say that about Darryl.
Okay, I think
true.
what you're
Exactly
guilty of here is kind of similar to, I think, something that the woke left has done, which is this concept creep, where you're talking about some people online who are doing this thing, and then you're lumping in other people with them. Listen, I'll just say this right now. Darryl Cooper is currently, I believe, almost finished, or he's working on a big World War II series. And when this comes out,
what's it going to be on?
we can see.
It's a podcast.
Yeah, he does long form.
Yeah, but he's not an expert, member. So why do we give a why do you care so much about this one person? Like, if you don't think he's offering anything controversial or like revisionist, but you also don't think he's an expert, why do we care about this person? Unless it's because he appeals to the kind of fucking dribbling, insecure, fucking narcissistic, watched The Matrix once and it ruined his entire fucking life. Fucking wet pants shithead here, Dave Smith. Because he appeals to you. He appeals to the kind of person who thinks that, who just is so desperate to know something that the experts don't, that the other people in the room don't.
Podcasts. When this comes out, I am quite confident to say beforehand that if you're going into it expecting him to be downplaying the atrocities of the Nazis or downplaying the evil things that Adolf Hitler did, you're going to be disappointed.
My point is, why are we even talking about this?
But how would you? Again, you wouldn't know. Because every time you're pressed on an example, you're, I don't even know about that.
Because you brought him up.
And Reynald, thanks for the 690 shekels. Really appreciate it.
Yes, because he comes on podcasts like this. My point is, this is not a serious historian. He's not a historian.
He never claims to be. He's been doing these long form podcasts on these subjects for over a decade. And if you go back to 2015 and listen to Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, it's an incredible piece. And it's
Excellent.
How many hours long?
30-something.
And it literally starts from the persecution of the Jews, where they're being driven out of Europe. It's like this horrific account of what happens to these people. It's what he's trying to do is paint a picture of how the world goes mad and how the world goes sideways. And he's doing it from the perspective initially of these Jewish people that are living in Europe, that all of a sudden their neighbors are turning on them and they're being attacked. Like it's incredibly charitable. But what he's trying to do is show what happens to human beings when they're confronted with unbelievable atrocities and how things go so incredibly sideways.
Lots of people have written and spoken about that.
So why is he not allowed to?
He
don't
is
understand.
allowed to.
So
He is allowed to. I'm saying that there's a weird way in which figures like him, whose ideas are not being countered when they are raised, are given platform after platform to spread their views. They are welcome.
Why it's always the same defense. It's like, if you can't defend the actual words, or you can't even explain why it's different to anyone who's actually qualified, then it's just like, oh well, I'm allowed to do it. That's the worst defense you can ever. It's like when someone says, "What are you going to do about it?" Like, come on, that's you only say that when you know you're doing something stupid.
To those platforms, I'm not saying they shouldn't be platformed. I'm saying these are very, very fringe figures who are pushing ideas that are either debunked now, have been debunked before, or they will not stand up against somebody who disagrees with them.
Oh, okay, I would just say maybe this is the disconnect here. When you say there's like not pushback, Darryl's one line on Tucker Carlson, this one line where he himself said he was being hyperbolic and kind of says this to prod at his buddy, got more pushback than any one line I've ever heard on a podcast. There were numerous articles written by historians, numerous shows that covered it. People went through, there were Twitter threads about it. So I don't exactly get your point. Like, there was...
Oh, and Dave went on Pierce with an actual historian talking about Churchill, and Dave just backed the off like a little invertebrate soy little cuck. That's what he did. He backed off. He just said, oh, I don't really know if I'm confident to debate World War II. He did the exact thing that he always does. He would not engage because it was just completely like, why? Why would you? Just let the guy say his piece. No one who likes Dave Smith will ever agree with what an actual historian says anyway. So just survive it and then never think about it again.
Lots of pushback. If you're saying he should go and debate somebody who's giving him pushback on that, okay, maybe. I also think it's reasonable for him to say, I don't really do debates.
Yeah, I think it's weird to mainstream very fringe views constantly and not give another side. I think that's weird.
Well, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a contradiction here. You're saying now that these are fringe views, but then you're also saying that these are enormously powerful views.
No. There's no contradiction. Let me clear it up if you think there is. I think there are very fringe views that have become mainstreamed on the right.
But then aren't they not fringe by definition?
Sure, you can play an epistemological game.
No, I'm just saying let's be accurate.
But you do understand the concept, don't you?
That fringe ideas become mainstreamed? Yeah. Okay,
right.
Sure.
So that's it.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure. So you're saying that what Joe shouldn't have done?
Yeah, as in that was a very stupid obfuscatory. Is that the word? Obfuscatory. Obfuscatory. Hang on. Is that even a word? It is. Why can I not pronounce it properly?
Obfuscatory.
It's not how you say that. Obfuscatory. Off. Obfuscatory. Obfuscatory. Why does that feel weird? Okay, I don't care. Bad. It's cringe.
Darryl Cooper on.
I'm saying that
obfuscatory. Would you say obfuscatory? Yeah, obfuscatory. Just feels weird to say that.
He should debate.
That if you mainstream very, very fringe.
Why did he even say it? Oh, it's because what Dave Smith said there was a completely obfuscatory objection that didn't contribute anything to the conversation. Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure. So you're saying that what Joe shouldn't have Darryl Cooper on?
I'm saying that
he should debate.
That if you mainstream very, very fringe views, which are easily able to be debunked, if you mainstream them, at some point that view that was so fringe will be what eager, very disconnected, unhappy people are going to start playing with too. And if these people are such experts in how you see a society go weird, they can look at what is happening to a portion of the right everywhere on this stuff. There is a portion of the right across the West that is playing this very dark game, and they're doing it deliberately, and you can't not be aware of that.
I agree with that. I don't think Darryl Cooper is doing that, but I do agree with your characterization.
No,
I think it's a pretty important distinction there.
You're just taking this one statement, and then this where he's trying to joke around with his buddy, this Churchill statement, and this is the basis.
He and these other guys are all doing the anti-Churchill stuff now.
But he's not doing an anti-Churchill stuff.
He and the other Churchill was in the orbit.
Churchill was the author of this whole Operation Unthinkable, right? Where they wanted to use the Nazis to invade Russia. Wasn't that Churchill?
Use the Nazis to invade. Okay, listen. I'm just very thankful to Joe Rogan for trying to engage with a particular argument. Okay, let's go. Let's hear where it goes. Come on. Yes. Yes, Operation Unthinkable was an idea. Yeah, it was a plan. It was never implemented because it was probably mental. Okay.
Is that not true?
We're going to have to get into the weeds on Churchill. There is always going to be a corner which you can get me on a bit of Churchill.
But that's the point.
You'd have to say which bit you're talking about.
What's the argument about it, though? What's he trying to say about it?
Churchill was never working.
It's good to have a comprehensive view because no one ever, before Darryl Cooper came along, no one ever spoke about Operation Unthinkable. Yeah, it's not like it's an integral part of World War II history about post-war plans, what happened next. It's not like every World War II documentary doesn't have a guy talking about Operation Unthinkable.
with the Germans to invade Russia.
No. This is a plan that was drawn up.
This is after the
Do you-
war,
do you
though.
know-
Operation Unthinkable is after the war. What do you mean we use the Nazis? What is he talking about there? Like, take some Nazi prisoners? Or is he just like, is he conflating Operation Paperclip with Operation Unthinkable?
How about
Go-
Operation
fire away.
Unthinkable?
Fire
You've
away.
never pull it
No
up,
one
Jimmy.
thought about Operation Unthinkable. True.
Operation Unthinkable was at the end of the war. I believe Churchill was
At the end
concerned
of the
about the rise of Russia in the rise of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And the idea was, and we'll find out what the historical facts are about this. Operation Unthinkable, the name given to two related possible future war plans developed by the British Chiefs of Staff Committee against the Soviet Union during 1945. The plans were never implemented. The creation of the plans was ordered by the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill on May 1945 and developed by the British Armed Forces Joint Planning Staff in May 1945, the end of World War II in Europe. One plan assumed a surprise attack on the Soviet forces stationed in Germany to oppose the will of the United States, the will of the United States and the British Empire upon Russia.
Just before we go ahead as well, it's also, there's nothing untoward about people having these contingency plans that just are lying around, like, for whatever scenario. But how committed they were to actually pursuing it is a different story.
The will was qualified as a square deal for Poland, but added that does not necessarily limit the military commitment. The assessment signed by the Chief of Army Staff on 9 June 1945 concluded it would be beyond our power to win a quick but limited success, and we would be committed to a protracted war against heavy odds. The code was,
This is okay. First of all, I never do Wikipedia.
Okay,
but
we don't have
that's
to do
okay.
Wikipedia.
No,
This-
that's okay. It's okay.
This is
But
just what Jamie pulled
Little
up.
jab
Okay,
there.
but first of all, yes, at the end of the war, a plan requested that wasn't seen through that suggests that after the defeat of Nazism, communism of the Soviet form is also going to be a threat to Europe, was simply an evidence that, I mean, it's obvious.
True.
It's what Churchill had worried about throughout the 40s. He worried about it in Yalta. He worried about it everywhere. I'm sorry, but I have to return to this point that
Irrelevant, but I just found out Heydrich's dad was a composer. Yeah, Heydrich was a big music guy. He was also very into Beethoven's string quartets, and he used to like listen to them and cry, usually like after a hard day's work of organizing the killing of all the Jews. Yeah, he was a very strange guy. Yeah. Anyway, what is the argument about Operation Unthinkable? Oh, it's Nazis. Nazis do this thing. It's like they try to do both things at once, always. So I think Operation Unthinkable, I think they're trying to suggest here that Churchill was just a warmonger. That's why, like, even after World War II is over, he wanted to go and fight the Soviets as well. The big reason for Operation Unthinkable was that after World War II, Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe were still in Soviet hands. Right? They reoccupied areas that a lot of which they only actually had any access to because of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, like the Baltics, like Poland. So the Brits, and Churchill especially, thought, well, that's a bit fucked, isn't it? Like, I thought we were about liberating the free world, and we've just left half of Europe to the Soviets. That's fucked up. No one consented to stay under Soviet rule in the Baltics or in Poland, Kaliningrad, whatever. Like, so, especially Poland, because Poland was the big reason. It was the first reason the Allies went to war with Germany anyway. The Allies declared war against the Nazis because of the invasion of Poland. So it's weird that the Second World War would end and then Poland is just occupied by another force. And neo-Nazis will use this to be like, like Churchill was really about defending the free world, but then he basically starts the war for Poland, but then leaves it with the communists. So it's like, that's like a neo-Nazi talking point to talk about how Churchill just loved war and didn't actually give a fuck about Poland or whatever else. It's stupid because Churchill wasn't even prime minister when they declared war on the Nazis. Churchill actually wanted to confront the Nazis much earlier than Poland. He even opposed the Munich Agreement. Anyway, that's why Churchill probably was flirting with the idea of invading the Soviet Union, because half of Europe was still basically left hostage in a hostage situation with the Soviet Union. They were under rule that they didn't consent to. And a lot of those countries were only under that rule because of a deal that was made with the Nazis, Molotov-Ribbentrop. So why is this a throwing up a contingency plan for this a problem, according to Joe Rogan?
This man manages to do one of the most heroic things in human history in standing alone against evil in its most concentrate form. And he does about as much as any human being can do to save the civilized world. If you just park that and you go on to a plan in 1945 to try to counter Soviet domination of Europe, you see what I'm saying? This is this is not doing something in the round.
Yeah, it's also, look, I mean, I'm not even like I'm not at all the expert on World War II.
Yeah, we know.
I'm not like gonna.
But you're still going to defend this one niche figure to the end of the earth, even though you don't even know anything about the contentions that he brings up and why they're problematic. Why? Fuck this. I don't know why. I don't know what it is about him that is so unlikable. It's hard to put it into words. It's just because he embodies so many things that are just so reprehensible. One is the extreme confidence that he posits on particular issues, but then is so willing to back the off as soon as he realizes that someone knows more than him. There's the smugness. There's the libertarian who is basically a Trump supporter, like the libertarian who always just kind of the American libertarian who just can't stop themselves from supporting authoritarian leaders. The fact that he defends Darryl Cooper without even knowing really why he's defending him. And I guess just the fact that he employs a lot of like bad faith strategy, I guess. Or he's like the classic example of someone who just reads like a list of quotes and uses that as his like worldview. And it's just, and also it's the that childish, like teenage attraction to alternate theory for its own sake, really. Yeah, I don't know, it's weird.
Debate with you about World War II, but I would say that like there's a lot of room for nuance and disagreement with what you just said. You know, in the 20th century, we had 2 world wars. They're the worst thing, objectively speaking, the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of the world. And the Second World War is the biggest bloodbath in human history. And it ended with handing the man who you just mentioned, Joseph Stalin, half of Europe. So listen, if you want to argue, I'm Jewish and of German descent, so like I'm not against the argument that it was the Nazis had to be defeated and that was the most important thing, but there still is just the basic facts that it almost couldn't have gone worse. It was like just a nightmare for civilization. And if people want to look back at that and go, man, was there any other way this could have been handled? Was there any other way? Were there blunders that were made here? Now, personally, what I feel much more comfortable arguing would be that I try to blame everything I can on Woodrow Wilson as much as I can, because also he created the income tax and the Federal Reserve and did so much to damage my country.
Yeah,
but
let's go. Yeah,
I think American entry into
that's the only joke he ever tells. He always says he wants to blame everything on Woodrow Wilson. That's the only joke he ever tells. He does that on Pierce as well.
World War I was really a disaster, and imposing the Treaty of Versailles on Germany was a disaster. I also think that's kind of fairly mainstream history. Like that's not a particularly controversial view that like imposing the Treaty of Versailles on Germany ended up in disaster.
Well, no, except that as Martin Amis said, the only way to not get to the Treaty of Versailles would be for Germany to win World War I. But yeah,
but we're not talking.
Yeah, compare like again for the problem with Treaty of Versailles is that compared to what we know that the Treaty of Versailles was a lot more lenient than what the Germans were willing to impose had they won the war. We also know that the Treaty of Versailles, like it was the debts were payable. I don't know. But even then, though, people who contest it and say that it could have been resolved in a better way, like, yeah, that's not an unusual claim. So what are we talking about there? Why did he go on that little tangent? What were the Germans willing to impose? I don't know the specifics. It was just the same but more, basically. I think a lot of it was also to do with the amount of reparations that the Germans imposed on France after defeating them in the 19th century. But I mean, I thought people always try to say this, well, like, oh, hyperinflation and the Treaty of Versailles, like this is why you got the. But actually, Nazi polling during the hyperinflation crisis was really low. They only had about 2% of the vote all the way up until 1929, 1930. The thing that set the Nazis into like electoral victory, it was the Great Depression. It wasn't hyperinflation or like Versailles measures, as far as I remember. It was the Great Depression that really set things off for them. But yeah.
About the Nazis winning the war.
Sure.
We're talking about, you know, listen, I think that.
But
what was he going on? What was that whole tangent about with him talking about the outcomes of World War II and what could people have done differently? What do you mean? Like, you're assuming that the Allied leaders could have made other decisions that would have reduced the amount of human suffering at the end of it? I mean, yeah, of course. Like the Bengal famine didn't have to happen, but you could also argue that you need to actually posit what could have been done. Like that's one example. Okay, like food requisitions didn't have to happen in the way that they did, or they could have other results of them could have been responded to more quickly. Okay, but is Dave Smith actually going to point to any particular example here of what could have been done differently to avoid the level of suffering? Molotov-Ribbentrop didn't have to happen, and actually maybe the entire course of human history would have been different without that. Wookie HD, thanks for the tier 3 sub. Really appreciate that.
Secondly, sorry, I just have to address that fundamental. You say the outcome of World War II and everything that happened in it was the worst thing that's ever happened, and the worst thing imaginable, worst possible outcome, you said.
No.
Just about.
You said worst possible outcome. Let me give you...
Oh, well, no, things could have gone a lot worse. What are you talking about? The Nazis could have won. The fact that the Nazis only really held on to Eastern Europe for 4 years, well, give them 8 years in Eastern Europe. Holy
A much worse possible outcome. Hitler wins.
Right. Okay. Sure.
So it's not the worst.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
that's true. Listen, but
so
okay,
everything
Hitler,
I just rambled about is completely redundant. But anyway, let's just keep it as vague as possible, Dave, because everyone knows you don't know dick about what you're talking about, but you'll try.
Okay, I'm not saying you can't dream up a worse outcome. I'm saying what you
It's
have.
not dreaming up. That's just what my country, Perth, and others went
but
through.
what did end up happening was 60 million people died, including the Holocaust, and then Joseph Stalin takes half of Europe. So okay, fine. I'll correct that. There is a worse outcome,
Right.
But that's not a great one.
No, nobody said it wasn't.
But whose fault is that, though, Dave Smith? What are you trying to say? Yeah, World War II was bad. What are you proving with that? You kind of need to elaborate a little, because again, he knows. I think Dave Smith is being intentional here. He knows that this is the argument that people like Darryl Cooper use to blame it on Churchill, to say that the war could have ended earlier had it not been for Churchill's warmongering. That's the whole neo-Nazi argument. Yeah,
This is like
Right.
there's a very weird argument that you now hear about this. This attempt to revision this, and I know why it's happening.
I don't think
segment.
there's anything
I
I'm saying
think
that's
there is.
revisionist.
I think there is, but this attempt to sort of say, look, you know, at the end of World War II, what have we got? Stalin has half of Europe. What was the point, and so on. That's going on. That's going on, and there are people who are feeding it. That argument is very similar. This particular school of, as it were, history is doing something that I've seen happen with American history as well, particularly with Lincoln. Lincoln's an interesting comparison to make with Churchill on this. There are people who will criticize Churchill for mistakes made. Not hard to do. Quite hard not to make mistakes while fighting at a war of total annihilation against your country.
Yes.
People will say, oh, he didn't sort this out in 1945. You know, it's rather like Lincoln. He didn't solve every problem in the world for all time, but he solved a hell of a big problem for his time. And that requires some kind of generosity of spirit and understanding in hindsight, as opposed to, I will find something that he did that I wouldn't have done, because if I'd have been running the British Empire in 1939, I'd have known exactly how to do it, and I'd have known how to hold the whole thing together, and I'd have kept Stalin back, and he'd have been great at Yalta.
You know, another argument is they could have stopped appeasing Hitler earlier, right? That could have. Why is that not a fucking? Why isn't more war the answer for World War II? Why did they allow him to rearm in the Rhineland? Why did they allow the Anschluss to take place? Why did they allow the annexation of the Sudetenland? Why did they allow Czechoslovakia? Why did the French see a bunch of Nazi trucks and equipment getting stuck in the mud in the Ardennes and just kind of let them stay there, slowly chugging through before the attack? People in the French army saw that happening. They saw the traffic jam in the Ardennes happening. They could have just gone and bombed the out of it and ended the war on day one almost. Why did Stalin agree to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and sell out like half of Eastern Europe? Like, why? God.
And Like, this is...
But I don't think anybody's saying that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there is a tendency of like woke left kids to do this, but I don't think that's what certainly not what I'm saying, and I don't think what Darryl's saying. I do also think that one of the bigger kind of the bigger picture dynamics to all of this is that we have at least since 9/11 been in a state of perpetual war, and all of these wars have been disasters. They have been so many lies involved in selling all of them. I mean,
the noise gate is strong. It's making you think your video paused. Wait, is my voice cutting out? I've not once seen it cutting out yet. What?
The whole Iraq war, the whole war in Afghanistan, just lying the whole way through. I mean, I remember literally having conversations with Green Berets in the middle of the war in Afghanistan, and they're like, George W. Bush is telling you that the army we're building up there is really successful. This thing's going to fall in a week without us. And then all through the Obama administration, it's just like lie after lie after lie with disastrous wars. And so this does create a fertile ground for people to say, I wonder if they were lying about all these wars.
Sure.
Again, I'm not really trying to argue with you about World War II. I'd rather argue about these wars.
So your argument is governments lie sometimes. We're going to completely exaggerate how often they lie, but anyway, governments lie. So therefore, people are going to be sucked into retarded alternative theories that are also lies. Also, I'm not going to explain why I'm so defensive of this alternate historian on World War II because I don't know. Sorry. What are you there to say, you coward? You snake.
I think the interesting question is whether you're busy watering it.
Well, should you not talk about mistakes that were made?
I hate Douglas Murray. But he's just like, it's a rare sight. You don't really get this kind of pushback on Joe Rogan, do you? Like, fairly competent as well. It's a well-phrased retort.
Again, I'm not really trying to argue with you about World War II. I'd rather argue about these wars today.
I think the interesting question is whether you're busy watering it.
Well, should you not talk about mistakes that were made overall?
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm all for going back and looking at mistakes.
So what is your argument then?
It's a very weird thing to go back, zone in on a man, say this one thing is a mistake and should characterize him, and you ignore everything else.
You're taking him out of context when you're talking about Darryl.
Is Murray a British Empire apologist? Yeah, probably. What the fuck? Yeah.
It's done, what was it, 30 plus hours?
So what? 30 plus hours of podcasting.
You take
you do that in a week.
UFC 314 is headed to South Beach, and it won't be all glitz and glamour, but the stars will be out. Don't miss any of the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of the UFC. It promises to be another banger of events, especially in the featherweight main event.
The advertisers must have really upped their budget here, haven't they? Pierce is doing this as well. Joe Rogan, Pierce. Chat, I'm very unimpressed by the state of this goal, just letting you know. Okay, I'm out here busting my buns. You guys. I mean, also, if you want to support the channel, you know, if you like what I do, you want to keep me going, keep me chugging, you just gotta, you know, send your Easter buck away to Super Chats. You can get memberships. You can go to Patreon if you really want. Wow, crazy. Support me on my journey in many various and interesting ways.
Between two evenly matched fighters.
Maybe I'll invite a Holocaust denier on. That's the best way, isn't it?
Fighters Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopez. It should be wild. First time, just pick something simple, like a fighter to win, and make your pick. It's that simple. And if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Step into the octagon with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code ROGAN. That's code ROGAN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Hey, Niall, thanks for the $4.99. I really appreciate that. Get Ian Carroll. Oh, I'll do my best. Ian Carroll would love to come onto this stream. Now, what's going on here? We have a clip. We have a clip suggestion. Speaking of Holocaust revisionism, 40211.
I don't know.
That's not 40211. Wrong timestamp. Oh my God, Ethan Idubs Hassan. Holocaust revisionism. Let's go.
Wait, here's Anissa justifying Nazi atrocities.
Oh, no.
Just for no reason.
Is experimenting on 10 children to obtain a cure for thousands of kids' lives justified? That's a really hard question, and I think if people are being 100% honest, they'd give you a different answer than what you're expecting. It's terrible.
Are you? Everybody's walking around. Everybody knows. What are you doing? Oh
as the Holocaust was, obviously it was horrendous, and how disgusting the doctor was that did the experiments on people. It was gay people, handicaps, twins.
Who else?
I think that's.
Who else? Who else? Who else did they do experiments on?
And obviously, they were obviously Jewish.
Okay.
Or they did it on Jewish people. They found a couple of really groundbreaking discoveries through that experimentation.
I think that's a complete lie.
Yeah, Mengele was actually a very researcher. His notes were his note taking was like just useless. And that's also, even if it were good and you made discoveries, no, you're not supposed to experiment on innocent people, you idiot. Okay. Wow. Name one. No, but actually the fact is that sorry, wait. I retract everything. I just remembered that Anissa is half Irish, half Lebanese, and is therefore riddled with oppression points that were machine gunned into her by the Jews. What revelations? What revelations? I think there was trying to inject dye into people's eyes to make them change color, blinded a lot of them. That was true. Okay, we learned that. That was groundbreaking. What other groundbreaking things did we learn? Holy. That if you sew twins together, it'll make them sad. That's true.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario.
Holy
New customers
shit,
only.
man.
Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
Yeah, but it's a very different thing.
different.
It's a very different thing.
He's not doing a podcast like talking to people.
Okay, nor is he doing scholarly work, nor is he working in the archives, clearly. Come on. I mean, he is not the historian of our era.
He's never said he was. He's just a podcaster. Also, he's done of work and he's really fascinating, and we're going to take him over any actual historian. Just it's so circular. It's like a little merry-go-round.
Claiming to be.
This is the thing, Joe. This is like punching jelly.
No, but you don't.
Oh my God, he's actually speaking to me. Why is he channeling me right now? I was able to do that. You know, if you inject chloroform into the heart of a twin, it might be bad for them. We only know that because of Mengele, by the way. He took brave steps for humanity. I was about to inject myself with chloroform to the heart the other day, and I was like, wait. Remember what the brave pioneer told us. Remember who walked so I could run.
His work.
What I'm saying, because I don't need to consume endless versions of a revisionist history. I understand.
But
I
it's
know
not
where this
revisionist
comes from.
history. If you listen to his work, it's not revisionist history. He's basing it on.
How the fuck would you know, you bald monkey fuck? How would you have any fucking idea? Like, both Joe Rogan's only contribution, which is actually interestingly more than Dave Smith's, who just doesn't want to debate it apparently. Joe Rogan's only contribution has been, well, didn't Churchill come up with Operation Unthinkable? Okay, and what? That's the only contribution he's had. How do you know it's not historical revisionism if you have clearly never spoken to an actual historian about World War II?
Historical
But
work.
yeah, I know. But okay, so this is my point about jelly. It's a shape-shifting thing. Comedian or historian?
He's not a comedian.
Historian or podcast? Would-be historian or actual historian? You say he doesn't claim to be a historian, but he's pumping out tens of hours of
Neither
history.
does Dan Carlin. He doesn't claim to be a historian either.
You see my point about the move? It's like some weird jujitsu move where you say, hang on, you know all about this as well. You say, I'm not a historian, but I'm going to spend my time talking about history. I'm not a journalist, but I'm going to spend my time talking about this thing. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to spend my time talking about this thing. It's a weird move, yeah?
No.
You don't think?
No, I'm a free American. I can talk about what I like.
We're not talking about whether you can do it, you fucking slimy worm fuck. Oh, God. Oh, he's such a mollusk. He's such a writhing mollusk. This guy's spine is a fucking noodle. Oh, I could do what I want, bro. We're not telling you what you can do. Me. You know that Israel can bomb the shit out of Gaza, right? Dave Smith. Imagine if someone imagine if Dave Smith is trying to like tell someone about the suffering in Gaza, and you're like, well, they can do that. They've got the planes. Like, what?
Well,
so
what you want.
So what is the point
I've
here?
noticed you can, but
but
we
what's
all
the
can.
point?
The point is, what are you pushing? What are you watering?
What am
Why?
I pushing?
Yes.
Liberty, free markets, peace, prosperity, not getting in another stupid catastrophic war, which we're on the precipice of right now. That's what I'm pushing.
What are we on the precipice of?
Well, I think weren't you?
Oh, yeah. He doesn't want to debate World War II because obviously his entire argument for how to deal with Russia is appeasement. That's why he thinks Putin can be appeased into stopping his assault on sovereign nations that don't want anything to do with him.
You were just talking about it the other day. Everyone I hear on the inside says we're about to attack Iran.
Yeah.
I think you just said something about that the other day. Am I wrong about that? I thought I saw in one of your interviews that you did.
Possibly.
No. Okay.
That doesn't mean we are on the verge of a war. I mean, you keep referring to we being in wars. There's a very big difference between a country having a military that's engaged and a country being at war. This country has not been at war for 25 years. You have not been fighting for the American homeland for 25 years.
Yes, we haven't. That's true. We haven't had a war on our shores. We've been picking on third world countries halfway around the world.
Well, you haven't been randomly picking on them. I mean, Afghanistan, you went...
I didn't say it was random.
Yeah, right, okay. It wasn't like you suddenly decided to bomb, again, Myanmar or something. We went for Afghanistan to find bin Laden and take revenge for 9/11 and stop an attack like that happening again on the American homeland. That is very different from a country being at war.
Yeah, but that's a total mischaracterization of...
With all due respect, assuming your role is to preach with some overlap of the choir, who is responsible and how should they approach making truth digestible to the disinterested public? I don't know what you mean by that. You can reword it if you want. I won't,
of the war in Afghanistan. It's one thing to say that might be an accurate characterization of the special operations mission in late 2001, but then we fought a 20-year regime change war against the Taliban.
Because you got dragged into the quicksand of war.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, fine. But
fine.
I thought it wasn't a war. Like, what? I don't get your argument.
No, I said it was a war. It's your use of we, as if you're personally like suffering this war. I mean, you're a taxpayer.
When I say we,
we're taxpayers,
implied.
so
okay.
we pay.
He's asking if we should have actual historians or funny podcasters teaching history because real historians are boring. Well, just do what I do. Or I don't know, like, because I'm not a historian, okay? I'm not an expert. I have a degree in sociology, okay? And then I didn't use it and spent 10 years doing music, okay? But the reason that I'm quite confident in my positions is usually because I just read what actual historians have to say and just kind of regurgitate it in a way that's more digestible to idiots like you. Like that's what I do. Yeah. Is that okay? I think that's fine. Also, you don't need to be entertaining. Like, how entertaining is I don't know, it's a bit insulting to people when you say you need to be entertaining. Like, you don't need a clown to teach you about history, right? People are interested in history. Like that, even that guy, Darryl Cooper, he's not a particularly entertaining person, but he is reasonable at telling a story, and people are interested in that, even though it is just revisionism. So why wouldn't they be interested in actual World War II history? Like, why not? Like, I just do this job because you guys don't want to read like Richard Evans, and you'd rather just his takes were condensed by someone who says slurs sometimes. Like, that's really the only reason we're all here, isn't it? You know, we're here because Benny Morris isn't gonna debate bedwetting TikTokers who scream and pretend that's just the way they talk.
Different. Okay, fine.
Douglas, if I went back and corrected you on every time you've used the term "we" to refer to your government or something like that, like if I were to say, "Oh, we just imposed tariffs on China," would you point out that I didn't, and it was the Trump administration?
I'm saying you take it obviously very personally, and that's your right to do so, of course. I'm just trying to make sure we're accurate here.
What do you think I'm taking personally?
Just that, the American wars.
Sure. Yeah, I think they've killed hundreds of thousands of people and cost my country $8 trillion and degraded my country very much.
And there's a very good argument to make on that. I'm still slightly bemused about this move from I'm an expert on this and I have views to I'm a comedian.
I've never claimed to be an expert on anything.
This is the problem, Joe. I mean, if somebody
Wait a minute,
says
you have to claim to be an expert on something to have an opinion on something?
You don't
Yes,
have
that's
to
exactly
be.
what you
You
have to
don't
do,
have to be.
Mr.
So
Rogan.
what's
This is
the
like,
issue?
I'm not a historian, but I'm pumping out history.
But wait a minute.
Being an authority would be another thing, right? Like a reliable voice on something. You can say expert if you want. Like, no one cares what that actually means. I'm slightly bemused by this.
What
I'm not
about
an expert,
just-
but
by
I'm
your
talking all the
technique?
time about
But
this
you're not
thing.
even talking about specifically on what he just said.
I just want to see Douglas Murray and President Sunday debating something. That would be good.
No, I'm saying this is my point about this. You say I'm not an expert.
So what's the solution? To not talk about it?
No,
Yes,
it's to have
yes.
more experts.
Go to jail. Go to Guantanamo. Go to Guantanamo, and we'll waterboard you until you go on camera and say there actually are WMDs in Iraq. And we need to bomb them again. Fuck off. Hell, man. Why does Dave Smith get invited onto anything? It's not for his jokes. It's because he talks about politics. Clearly, he is seen as someone who is worthy of having their political opinions broadcasted to millions and millions of people by Piers Morgan, by Joe Rogan, by Candace Owens. Yeah, he's clearly an authority on politics to some of these people. I'm just a regular old guy who has a passion for the truth. Off. Best of both worlds, man. Woot, thanks for the €5. We should at least get to 4 out of 20. Wow. Jesse Tate, thanks for the $10. Pity because I think Murray is well-read and knowledgeable. In the right forums, he pulls out loads of references from literature and history, but 99% of the time, he just goes on mainstream slam fests and it's tribal and panders. Yeah, I know. There's a game people play. It's cringe. Eli Goblin, thanks for the £10. Get yourself something pretty, dollface. Jesus. Charles Oberon, thanks for the 6 shekels. Any opinion / familiarity with Midas Touch Network? Midas Touch Network, I don't know. Heard of them, don't know anything about them. Ben, thanks for the 50 PLN for your Baczynski collection. I got some more Baczynski, yeah.
And
Well, the expert
To
class
hear-
hasn't done a great job,
I
man.
know.
This is follow the science.
Absolutely,
Yeah, but you know what?
absolutely, I
Okay,
agree
so fine.
with
So
that.
during,
I just said to you, I agree with that.
Right, I know.
But
so
one of the
Douglas,
problems
during
is-
all of
Fire
COVID,
away.
I will put my track record against any of the expert class on COVID. I'm glad to do that. So should I have just shut up? Should I have shut up by
Okay, so you're not an expert, you're better than the experts. Is that what we're saying now?
opposing lockdowns and opposing vaccine mandates and
Well,
talking
that
about
was
the
the
lab leak
argument at the
theory?
time. You realize
that's
that,
the
right?
entire argument that you're making. Let the experts handle this.
If only.
You're not an expert. You're right. I was just a
You're
comedian.
wildly not listening to what I'm saying. I think you have to take. I think we should agree, perhaps, on the following: that one major thing can break down in front of your eyes, or many major things, and it does not mean that every single one of the sewer gates should be lifted. Okay,
Yeah, I get that
But
point.
Right.
who's saying it should be?
saying this is a chatter on what is part of our side at the moment.
I think Douglas
Is it a
Murray
lot-
because he's kind of been very tangentially related to these spaces for a while. I think this is him realizing that he's basically in an industry where no one actually cares about anything. Pope John Balls, thanks for the 13 Canadian 99. To be fair, Dave is just like every other personality that have come up in the last few years. The problem is that those with opposing views to his do a terrible job of convincing the layman. Yeah, but is that really... Whose fault is that? To some degree, like I think the layman is just kind of dumb. Like, I don't... If the layman is the kind of person these days who is so, especially in online or alt media, if the average person on alt media is just drawn to views that are out of the mainstream and are generally wrong, then what can you do, really? Is it just because his powers of persuasion are better? Like, maybe Dave Smith is like kind of persuasive to people who don't really know that much about a particular topic, but I don't think his powers of persuasion are so good that that's the reason he does better than other people when it comes to these things. I don't know. Like literally, in this debate, if you think Dave Smith or Joe Rogan are coming on top of Douglas Murray on the World War II conversation, when literally neither of them are offering anything on World War II, like you have to be biased. I don't think it's Douglas Murray's fault that most of the Rogan audience is going to side with Dave Smith on this, right? That's not Douglas's fault on the World War II thing. That's because people are inclined to believe Dave Smith more than Murray.
Of the sewer gates are being lifted, sometimes by people who know that they're doing
predisposed.
It, sometimes by people who don't, sometimes by people who say, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. But at the very least, there's some damn hygiene that should be required, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly
Right.
what you're asking, but sure.
Just that. Let's have a bit of hygiene on our own side, not lift every sewer gate.
And when you say
not
our own side,
let-
you mean the right wing broadly speaking?
Broadly speaking, and I'm sort of funny about libertarians. I'm never quite sure. I always think, I always say, I think libertarians are essentially the bisexuals of politics. They should just choose, Joe. They should choose. It's
They
kind
do choose. They choose authoritarian right-wingers. That's what they do. In America, for some reason, every libertarian just sides with the authoritarian right-winger. That's been the case for like 10 years now. Maybe longer.
they just want everything at the buffet.
That's very funny.
Well, I think we want some things. I don't know. Okay, that's a weird way to put it, but I get
see your point.
All right. Well, I mean, I don't know. Look, I mean, essentially, I just don't. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. But if your argument is that, like, you're saying I claim to be an expert, but then I have like a parachute to get out of it by being like, hey, I'm just a comedian who's just saying this.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever like really claimed to be an expert. I
why
have
are you
opinions.
going
God,
around-
why does he look so meek the way he says this? Is it just the term expert? Is that why? Like, you don't have a qualification? And do we need a different term? Like an authoritative voice? Like a reliable voice? I think that's what he means by expert. I don't think Douglas Murray is saying expert like you hold a degree or something like that, or like you're a professor. I think they just mean that you know enough about it to to try and persuade millions of people of your perspective. Yeah, he said he knows more than the experts. What are we talking about? He said he knows more than the experts. Me. Like if we go by like by the meaning of the word that Douglas Murray is implying here, and this whole conversation is implying, like I would call myself an expert. Yeah, compared to everyone else who gets a massive soapbox to talk about like the Middle East. Yeah, I'm an expert compared to those people. Yeah, of course I am. But that doesn't mean that's not expert in like the literal sense of being like a professor or an academic or anything like that. We're just expert as in this context of this conversation, they're talking about experts as in people who know enough to feel like they're justified in sharing their knowledge and perspectives with millions of people. Okay.
I know, but
Because I'm interested in these topics.
Yeah, I know, but isn't it weird to go around, for instance, let's get to the last year and a half. It's a bit weird to be simultaneously saying, I'm not an expert on a conflict and talking about it everywhere.
I don't think so. Not really. No. I mean, I don't know. I don't think like
I don't know.
I don't see how you
Do
can't
you
have an
talk
opinion
about
on
these things?
Which things?
All these things that we're talking about.
Some of them, yeah.
Are you an expert?
I am on some, yes.
On some,
But
but
you talk
not.
about some that
but
you're not
some
an
are
expert on.
You'll notice
Right, so
that I
what should
didn't
you do?
just.
What should you do if those subjects get breached?
Well, I think that you educate yourself as much as you
Shouldn't
can.
you say I'm not an expert and then give your opinion if you're
depends.
in the middle of a
There's
conversation?
nothing wrong with that, is there? Like if I'm in a debate about the Middle East and then Sudan comes up, yeah, I might say, yeah, sorry, I don't know much about Sudan, but we'll see where this is going. Yeah, what's wrong with that? I have just been informed that Brianna Wu is in Israel. I heard she was going. Well, yeah, she actually went and done it, did she? She's in Israel. What's she doing there? Who's she meeting? Did she just go by herself? What's the plan? Why wasn't I invited? I wouldn't want to go to Israel with Brianna Wu. Oh fuck. The view of Tel Aviv is stunning. About to go for a 15-mile run down the beach through the city. Cute. Propaganda tour for, I don't know what she's doing there. Ask her to go to the West Bank. No, she's not making it in the West Bank. Sorry. Chud Raiders, hello. We're watching Douglas Murray and Dave Smith on Joe Rogan. Honestly, this is still like the most pushback I've ever seen on a Joe Rogan podcast, especially since it's like pushing back on the whole format of Joe Rogan, like the whole homespun intellectual retards who just agree with everything the conspiracists say and disagree with everything that like established knowledge dictates. But Pope John Balls, answer 1618.99. We're forgetting that a lot of Americans still believe Mexico will pay for the wall and China will be paying for the tariffs. Okay.
As I say, I think that it's a weird move to say, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to talk about it nonstop. I think that is strange.
Listen, I will certainly concede that I am weird. So I'm not disagreeing with you. It's weird that I'm as obsessed with all this stuff as I am. I mean, like, okay, I'm a weird guy. I tell jokes at nightclubs and then get obsessed with politics and monetary policy and like, okay,
That's
fine.
so weird. You're not like the other girls, Dave. Fuck, I hate him so much. Like, again, it's like, how did he manage to get away with saying he's better than the experts on COVID? But then also, I never said I'm an expert. I'm not an expert. Fuck off. Fuck.
Fine. But I just like fundamentally disagree with this idea that, which I really do think is quite anti-democratic in spirit and quite elitist, that there's an expert class. They can have opinions on all of these things. It's weird for any regular person
It's
who
such a
just read about it.
Not my view. Not my view.
It seems like
when Douglas calls himself an expert on particular topics, he's not saying it's because of his academic credentials or because he's been certified by anyone. He's just saying he knows enough to talk about it with confidence and in front of a of people, which should be the case.
I conceded already. I said a long time ago that I believe much of the expert class let itself and us all down very badly. And I think that happened in foreign policy in areas, not every area, but it happened in some areas. I think it happened with COVID in many areas. But that does not mean that it's just a free-for-all. No. There are some things we can still verify.
What do you think of Murray's performance so far? So far, he is absolutely railroading the other two. Yeah, like he's just so much, like he's actually making sense, and the other two are just being so evasive of the entire like culture that they are part of and that they prop up and that they perpetuate and basically just produce they're just part of like contributing so much to this generation of insecure 20-somethings who have no real direction in life, and the one bit of solace they have is listening to quacks on Joe Rogan or any of the other podcasts and thinking, well, at least I know something that all the other normies in the room don't know. Yeah, that's a real problem. Yeah, especially when it's starting to go back into like Holocaust revisionism and shit. Like we're back in the 2017 days where it's normal to platform that shit.
Be true and can still agree on as baseline levels of agreement in a free society. And yes, everyone is free to air their views, but it does not mean that everyone who sounds off on an issue, whether it's World War II, the war in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, has an equally valid point of view. No.
I certainly wouldn't argue. I mean, that to me is just batting down a straw man. I mean, I certainly wouldn't argue that everyone has an equally valid point of view. And I certainly wouldn't argue that there shouldn't be some standards of like who you would want to find interesting and talk to and who you wouldn't. But also it's like, so let's have the conversation that like, I don't know, like if there's, if there are experts out there who can smack all of this stuff down or just destroy every point that I
but what stuff? You just said that you're not going to debate World War II because you don't know anything about it, but you're just going to defend one figure on it. Worship him at the cuck altar, even though you don't want to defend any of his points. Like, fuck me.
Over the years or whatever. Like, okay, so then do it. And then let's see.
Yeah,
except they did do it. They did do this, didn't they? Pierce brought on a historian to talk about Churchill and to explain why Darryl was full of shit on everything. And do you know what Dave Smith did? Do you know what Dave Smith did? Dave Smith said, yeah, well, I don't really know anything about all that. You know, World War II is not really my specialty. But, you know, don't we have a right to say these things, to ask these questions? Like, that's what Dave did, because he is a disgusting, insecure, miserable, manipulative moron who knows he's kind of full of shit in quite a lot of ways, and just said what he needed to get through that uncomfortable situation, and we just never talk about it again. That's what happened.
That's a bit weird because also then it's like the debate me bro thing. But
you just criticized Darryl for not debating.
It's fine. Yeah, I know. Let me just make the main point. I think what I'm trying to get at, Joe, is that it's a bit like the Twitter algorithm thing, which is, yes, everyone is and should be free to say what they like on Twitter, apart from whatever the very fringe things of like immediate incitement to violence and all that kind of thing. But we all know that one of the oddities of Twitter, including since Elon took over, is that what you hope is a restored marketplace of ideas ends up pushing you really crazy.
Yes.
And that is what I'm suggesting is happening on a podcast level and maybe on a wider level beyond that. I get stuff on Twitter that I just do not want. I do not want a guy with 1,500 followers who's got some zany new view on something, who isn't an expert but is an expert, to be pushed at me. And effectively, what is happening with the Twitter algorithm is happening everywhere else as well. And we're all for the open marketplace of ideas. I want that. I thrive in it. But it is different once you get into the thing of, is something manipulating the algorithm behind? Is the algorithm being pushed on me? Why am I being given this? Why am I not being given that? Why am I being...
Mina, thanks for the 11-month tier 4 sub. I really appreciate that. China used a weapon of brain destruction, brackets COVID, on Joe Rogan. It was super effective. Look at him, man.
Constantly pushed this view. And I think that the answer to a great degree is the same thing in your world as it is in the Twitter world, which is if you go straight online and you say, you know, JFK file drops, watch live stream of Kennedy historians reading the papers live, you're not going to get any views. No one's going to watch it. That's what's needed is for the people who know the documents to go through the documents. But you and I know that if, as there was some guy who did immediately, you do something like live stream Mossad involvement in JFK, you're going to milk it.
Let's go.
You're going to cream it online. The money comes in. I'm saying that there's a similar algorithm in all of our lives that we're not as aware of as we should be, which is that because we all know this at some level, that there are certain things that get a bit of your base going or get people going interesting and crazy, and then they start debating it and all that sort of thing. And that algorithm of online seems to me to be spilling into the real world.
I don't disagree that there's certainly more sensationalist stuff will get you more clicks. I also don't think it's not really unique to social media or podcasting. I mean, this has been true.
No, believe me, I write for the tabloids.
Yeah, this has always been true. Right? So yeah, okay, so it's kind of one of the problems of humanity.
I don't think anybody's arguing against that. You know, it's certainly never my intention when I talk to someone to try to get more views. It sounds crazy, but I'm only talking to people that I'm interested in talking to. And in Darryl's case, it's because I've been a listener of his podcast for years.
Yeah, but why? Why did you choose him, Joe? Come on, please. Maybe, you know, Douglas should ask that. Fuck Douglas for not asking. Just why? Why did you choose him over a mainstream? Can you name a few mainstream historians on World War II?
That's it. This is like genuinely.
I would have never thought you defending Douglas Murray. Wait, what? I would have never you defending Douglas Murray. Mate, Douglas Murray is debating two people who are defending a Holocaust revisionist. I don't know what you want me to say. The bar is pretty low, all right? Douglas Murray's debating David Irving's contemporary simp. I'm confused. Whose side do I take here?
How I perceive things. Well, that's why you're here. I'm genuinely interested in your views as well. Even though you completely disagree with him. This is the marketplace of ideas in real time.
I agree. Although, as I say,
David Irving's Dingleberry
massively underrepresented the pro-Ukraine argument and the pro-Israel argument in the last 2 years.
I don't know. I mean, well...
That's my observation.
Okay. You're totally allowed to have that observation.
Yeah.
What's the pro-Ukraine argument that you think is not being represented enough?
Well, my broad view is that...
The idea that selling out Ukraine will not avert nuclear war. I think for Joe Rogan, you know, stoners... I'm being so mean to stoners. I'm sorry. They all think that, like, if we keep pushing, then Putin will launch a nuke and kill us all. Selling out Ukraine will not make the world any safer from a nuclear exchange. Maybe that one? Probably the biggest one?
Again, something to do with the algorithm, that anything that is conspiratorial about Zelenskyy or the Ukrainians in the conflict does very well. Anything that says, actually, the Ukrainian army is fighting to try to retain as much of their country as they can, doesn't do as well.
Aren't you on amphetamines? Yeah.
I think that everything that is pushing...
When I say stoners, what I'm actually doing is I'm making fun of people who vape because they have MS. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Those retards. They should suffer because life is suffering.
The idea that, for instance, the Americans caused it or something like that does well. I think everything that says, actually, in February 2022, Vladimir Putin's tanks invaded Ukraine, and they shouldn't have done. doesn't do as well.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that what Vladimir Putin did wasn't horrific.
That's not my point. The point is that after that, there's a whole set of things. Let's look at, for instance, the issue of corruption.
Okay.
Ukraine is a pretty corrupt country by EU standards, by World Bank standards. And it's been a problem, as it is in that neck of the woods.
There we go.
And it's understandable that if the US is one of the countries putting money and arms into Ukraine, then it's going to be a subject of legitimate interest to the American people and others, European taxpayers. Nevertheless, you end up in this, and I know this because it's the same thing in the old media. You end up on like the new bit of the story. And there's always a risk that you will lose sight.
A bit confused why you thought Murray did well in the first part. If anything, appeared as a massive hypocrite, given how little he knows about everything he talks about. What, with World War II? The problem with that is that I feel like Douglas Murray, every time he tried to go into detail about World War II, Dave Smith said, "I'm not going to debate you on World War II." And Joe Rogan, it's like another tactic as well, where people will just kind of like, they're championing a position, but they just don't want to defend it in any detail. And it's like, what can you do when someone's saying, "Oh, I don't know anything about this particular thing"? It's like, do you just tell them anyway? Like, and they can't engage with it.
Of the beginning of the story, for instance, I mean, Putin's corruption is
all of his books are riddled with misinformation. I haven't read any of his books, but I know that when he talks about like Muslims and European immigration, yeah, that's like a huge problem. But that's not what they're debating. They're debating World War II. So
legendary, gargantuan, and not as interesting, it seems to me. The algorithm doesn't push that. And I think that's, to a greater extent, the case with the Israel-Hamas war as well.
Well, isn't there a little bit of a concern? Like, I would say a couple things here. Number one, I'm not denying, I don't know how the algorithm works or what it's pushing. And it's an interesting thing that we probably should all know more about. But I think there's a danger when you're to just classify everything as, well, the algorithm pushes this and doesn't push this. It's like, it could also be that some ideas are just resonating more and some ideas are more popular than other ideas. And there's probably both of those things are at work in that dynamic.
Sure.
But I also think that something like the reason why, say, talking about Ukrainian corruption is more interesting in a lot of ways than talking about Russian corruption is obviously because, like, well, one of these countries is an enemy and the other one is one that we're sending tens of billions of dollars to. And so, yes, debating on between Zelenskyy and the weapons companies, I don't know. He says he only got $70 billion of it, but we've spent closer to 170, so whatever. But
does he think that, so he's already pushing like a retarded conspiracy about Zelenskyy stealing a bunch of aid? Okay, good, well done. That's interesting. I felt like Dave would be a bit more informed about how those arms shipments to Ukraine actually worked, but okay, apparently not. Okay, wow. Also, let's say it's the case that you would talk more about Ukrainian corruption because that's the people we support. Okay. Then you are telling a biased, agenda, like, informed version of the story. You are. If you do it that way, yeah, but that's because you're trying to sell a biased, like, framing of the story to sell an agenda. You have to put it that way, though. Because if people are learning about a conflict from you, and they learn all about Ukrainian corruption and a few things about it that aren't true as well, like Zelenskyy stealing billions of aid money. If you learn about that, but you don't learn anything about Russian corruption, then you're going to think Ukraine is the really corrupt country. You're not going to think anything. And then if someone wants to defend Russia, like another creator, then you're going to be susceptible to them.
Point is that obviously, if there is a country that we are propping up, funding, arming, and they're corrupt, I would say my starting point would always be to be more concerned with that corruption than an enemy country, which it's almost kind of a given is a corrupt country. Like, I don't know.
Well, it's not necessarily a given to some people, though, is it, Dave? Because if people are getting introduced to the topic and you don't remind them quite frequently about how much more corrupt Russia is than Ukraine and why Russian corruption is a big part of the reason that Ukraine overthrew Russian influence in the country, why Yanukovych, one of the reasons that they didn't like him was because he was catastrophically corrupt. He had a palace. He had a presidential palace. He ordered his police officers to fire on peaceful protesters. He promised the Ukrainian people and the parliament that he would honor their wishes to go with the European customs agreement, and then U-turned at the last minute for a Russian deal that no one wanted. And no one had any details on either. So actually, no, Russian corruption is a big part of the Ukrainian story as well. Also, not to mention that Ukraine's performance on the corruption index, since they've been more involved with the West, has been going down. Like, they've been doing better in terms of dealing with corruption recently. Like,
sure, there are fringes of the right who might say, like, Vladimir Putin's some great guy or something like that. But that is, I really do not think that is the argument that most people who are critical of this, of Biden's policy, are making.
Sure. I mean, I think
they're just people who say all the things that benefit Russia, who advocate for things that would help Russia. Because obviously, you don't need to think Putin's a great guy to understand that disarming Ukraine or like pulling aid back from Ukraine would help Russia. That's what people are selling out pieces of territory in Ukraine helps Russia, or thinking that the more you help Ukraine, the more you're risking Putin firing off nukes. That helps Russia.
I think one of the interesting things that happens in this is the old cliche of losing the wood for the trees.
Wood.
It just happens an awful lot, and it's the nature of the old news cycle, let alone the current one, the social media era. Actually, I remember that, so I don't go back to World War II, but let me just very quickly, I remember this debate with Pat Buchanan when he was debating much more learned historians on the subject of the origins of World War II. And the whole thing got lost in all of this sort of mad puzzle of views about iron ore production in the Bavarian forest and this sort of thing. And I remember that everyone was all over the place, and the moderator turned to the historian Andrew Roberts and said, Andrew Roberts, why did World War II begin? And he said, World War II began because Hitler invaded Poland. And those moments come along quite often at the moment, which is, yes, there's an awful lot of very interesting things to look into. There's a lot of very interesting things going on which we should all be able to talk about and do talk about. But sometimes you have to remember the origin causes of things as well, and you have to stick to keeping that in mind.
Yeah, well, I
think that a lot of people are pretty bad at the moment of keeping that in mind. Like, you can concede Ukrainian corruption, you can concede all sorts of things, and still not lose sight of the thing of, if Russia rolls tanks into neighboring countries, it can't be allowed.
Oh, well, listen, okay, so on that, I think we have an area of agreement. And I do think, like, even while I much prefer the path that Donald Trump is pursuing to the path that Joe Biden pursued when it comes to the war in Ukraine. And of course, this is, Donald Trump's thing, is once you piss him off, he's going to call you every bad nickname that there is. But when
when you don't piss him off.
Well, sure. But when he said,
the Danes come to mind.
What I believe he said that Zelenskyy started the war, or something like that, which is like, okay, all right, that's a little bit ridiculous.
He said Zelenskyy started the war and Zelenskyy was the dictator.
Yes. Okay. All right. So
Trump said that?
Yes. But it was after Zelenskyy pissed him off.
Zelenskyy started the war?
Yeah. But this is how Donald Trump is. Love him or hate him, for better or for worse. Donald Trump, it's like,
bro, can you imagine? It's just, they're not going to take it seriously, though, are they? Can you imagine if Biden had said something like that? Because I remember Joe Rogan soying out and laughing his roid-ridden tits off about every little misspeak that Biden did. Bro, if Biden said that Zelenskyy started the war with Russia, like, you would never hear the end of it. But now to him, it's like, oh, first of all, he didn't even know about it, and then after, it's just going to be, oh yeah, well, that's our Donald, that's our boy. How did he not know? Oh, because none of his partisan shithead guests told him. That's why he doesn't know.
He feels that you disrespected him or came at him, he's going to be 10 times more vicious to you.
By the way, this happened 2 weeks before the disastrous Oval Office meeting.
Yeah.
And I wrote the next day the cover in the New York Post, which was a big picture of Vladimir Putin with the headline, "This is a dictator." Just, again, as I say, not to lose track in all of the melee, not to lose track of the basic facts.
Well, look, I will say this, as somebody who is, I'm very anti-war, broadly speaking.
Wow.
And I do agree with you that we should be able to have conversations about all the things that led up to the war and all the different, blunders that were made, and also still recognize that Vladimir Putin invaded a country and is responsible for at least hundreds of thousands of people dying. And, my Scott Horton, who I always try to promote on here, he just wrote this book called Provoked. I think it's the best book that's been written on the history leading up to the war between, it basically takes you from the collapse of the Soviet Union up to the war in Ukraine.
And how it's all the West's fault, basically.
But the book is called Provoked. And the argument is that Western policy was very provocative toward Vladimir Putin, and there were a lot of off-ramps that could have been explored and should have been explored. But he has an entire chapter in the book where he is saying, like, look, why do these
submissive little fucking beta males, obviously, why do they always... Why are they so seduced by this idea that if only we were just nicer to the deranged tyrant? Why do they always get so, why do they always gravitate towards that persuasion? Why? Same with Hitler as well, but he said with Churchill, because the thing Darryl Cooper says is that he thinks World War II could have been cut short had Churchill been more amenable towards Hitler. Now they say the same thing about how they could have been nicer towards Putin. Why are they so soy about dictators? As a libertarian as well, why is that always the thing that's yes, what could we have done to be a bit more friendly to the guy who literally will tell you that his objective for going into Ukraine is to repair the losses of the Soviet Union, and who thinks Ukraine is not a real country? Come on. Why are you so desperate to find ways that you could have been nicer to Putin? It's so stupid.
Putin had a lot of other options. He didn't have to do this. It's not as if any of that justifies his invasion. And so I do agree with you that whenever we're talking about a war, particularly a war of aggression, that should always be in the front of people's minds. I mean, you can criticize, I would say, I think I'm consistent on this across the board. You can criticize lots of things about the insurgency in Iraq, certainly, but you should remember that George W. Bush invaded the country when he shouldn't have, and based off lies. So I say that when my government does it, I'll say it when the Russian government does it also. That being said, there's a very strong argument that there were many policies that the U.S., NATO and Europe as well, but mostly the U.S., pursued that were just almost... if you wanted to come to this inevitable conflict, this would have been the policy to pursue to give you the best chance to end it.
Yeah, like when the Soviet Union fell, and then when NATO forces and Europe, and especially the United States, went into, what was it? It was Moldova, didn't they? And they set up NATO bases, and they were like, hands off us, Russia. And then they started to discriminate against ethnic Russians in there, and then forced Russia into... No, that didn't happen, did it? No, actually, when Russia went into Transnistria and grabbed that piece of territory from Moldova on the grounds that there were ethnic Russians in there who needed protection and have been there ever since in a frozen conflict, that actually happened in '92 before the West had done anything to Russia. That was even before Russia joined the IMF and took IMF loans. Before NATO had done anything as well. It's almost as if as soon as the Soviet Union fell, the Russian Federation has had this consistent desire to recuperate lost parts of the Soviet Union. That's what they've done. Oh yeah, when NATO told Chechnya that they might have a path to membership. Or when the Georgian Civil War happened, Because that was, 91 to 93 when Russia got involved in the Georgian Civil War? NATO didn't cause that, did they? Almost as if the history kind of shows you that this Russian aggression towards former Soviet territories has kind of been the case regardless of what NATO was doing.
I was with a British military friend recently, and somebody asked, what does the fog of war mean? And he gave a brilliant example of what it means on the battlefield. A lot of people don't understand. There's a version of the fog of war in history as well. The great Czech writer Milan Kundera had this beautiful phrase in a book of his from the 90s called Testaments Betrayed, where he said, the odd thing about mankind is, he said, we walk through life in a fog, and we stumble along a path, and we create the path as we stumble along it. But that's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing is that when we look back, we see the man and we see the path, but we don't see the fog.
Wow.
Everything looks inevitable when you're standing in the present. everything looks like it was going to happen this way, and you have these endless, often
that is quite true. There's no getting around that.
Fascinating, often futile explorations of what might have been, but it doesn't take into account the fog.
It's a very good point.
And the fog of Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union was pretty considerable. The efforts in the 1990s to bring them into a more obvious part of the international order failed. And my own view has always been that, in part, we missed an opportunity to pay a kind of civilizational respect to the Russians, which they deserved. But also throughout the period that people now say...
I wonder if, like, obviously people like this would just get resigned to the dustbin of history, so you wouldn't really know. But I do wonder if there were people in World War II who said, we should actually, like, maybe some British politicians or like some backbencher who says, maybe we should actually stick to appeasement even after Poland, because if we don't, then Hitler's going to invade the Soviet Union, you know? And someone might take that and be like, look, I told you so, now that they've done it, even though connecting one to the other doesn't necessarily work. Because now what's happened is that when Russia invaded Ukraine, people that Dave Smith is a fan of, all these like Mearsheimer realist shitters, went digging all the way through, like scrambling to find any instance of any general or any politician saying, if we expand NATO in the Baltics, well, maybe that'll result in a Russian invasion, and just taking that and being like, look, this is why it happened. This is why it happened. When you just have to listen to the leaders to why it happened. Obama and Merkel tried to appease Putler Sigh. I mean, they did, yeah.
There are all of these off-ramps. And now so many people claim that NATO went around the region desperately trying to provoke the Russians into some kind of war, or inevitably leading them that way because of NATO expansionism. They never take into account what was, in my memory and experience, very clear, which was NATO didn't go around recruiting.
Yeah.
People came to NATO.
They did, yeah.
Countries came to NATO wanting to join, precisely because they feared the aggression that Ukrainians have suffered since February 2022, and indeed before. I was in Georgia just after the 2008 war began, the country, not the state. Always has to be confirmed, otherwise people are like, what?
Yeah, because as soon as the Iron Curtain fell, everyone in Eastern Europe had very good reasons to not want to be next door to the Russian Federation without protection. Yep. Yeah. Man, the Poles, didn't they? The Poles basically blackmailed Clinton, didn't they? Yeah, didn't they threaten to support Clinton's opponent if they couldn't get NATO membership? Fury, thanks for the $1.99 twice in a row. Really appreciate that. Double dono. Listen, that goal's almost there, guys. Three to go. We might actually fulfill a goal. Can you imagine what exciting prospect?
Who invaded Georgia?
We attacked Georgia.
They're the bastards. But I was in the country of Georgia, and Putin had tried to invade them and had seized South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and they were desperate to join NATO. In fact, they're desperate to join the European Union.
They threatened to make nukes before
I
that.
rather frivolously said to a Georgian friend, if you want, we can swap. You
should
can
probably
take
learn more
British
about that.
membership of the EU. But in the NATO thing, they were desperate for it. And they were desperate for it precisely for the reason that many of the Ukrainians were desperate for it, which was only way to stop Putin expansionism.
I think, no, Murray should avoid that one, because Ukrainians are desperate for it now. But when Russia annexed Crimea, majority opinion in Ukraine, even in the West, was not that excited about joining NATO. Remember, the annexation of Crimea and the war in the Donbass did not happen because of NATO. And Ukraine's position on NATO is exactly the same then as it was in 2008, as it was in 1994. Right? Ukraine's position with regards to NATO was the same. What changed was that Ukraine got rid of Russia's puppet leader in Ukraine, Yanukovych, and they also sided with the EU customs deal over the Eurasian customs deal. That was what happened. It was over a sovereign country having an economic vision that Russia didn't like. That was why Russia did it. And the way people tried to shoehorn NATO into this, Yanukovych left. Yanukovych left, okay, after the millions of protesters, he was removed. I know he flew away, but he was kind of, he was done, okay, because of the protests. He was, didn't he get removed? But didn't the parliament like impeach him by like 400 votes or something? Yeah, he was railed.
So, in the whole fog of the post-Soviet era, that is one of the many things that gets left out of the conversation. And by the way, Putin's actions
Tactical
in
retreat.
February 2022 and since, all he's done is provoke 2 new countries to join NATO, and his borders with NATO have grown.
That's true.
Finland and Sweden wanted to join. And the only reason Finland and Sweden wanted to join was because they too are scared. It's a heck of a thing to get the Swedish to join a military alliance. It doesn't come easy to them. It doesn't come natural. And these countries joined because, like Georgia, like Ukraine, they desperately feared Putinist expansionism. And they weren't wrong.
Okay, but I get your point. First off, the war in Georgia in 2008 actually came, what was it, 2 or 3 months after the Bucharest summit, where NATO announced that Georgia and Ukraine would be entering.
No, it wasn't. Again, they said that NATO, that Georgia and Ukraine has a future in NATO, but they also, and Dave Smith won't mention this because he's a propagandist lying invertebrate. He's not going to say that Georgia and Ukraine went to Bucharest expecting a path of accession to NATO and did not get it. They were not granted it, specifically because countries like Germany didn't want to anger Putin. As in, Putin was appeased. Russia was appeased in 2008 over Bucharest. Ukraine's and Georgia's NATO aspirations were frozen. They have not moved, and Russia went into Georgia anyway. Like, this revisionism is so
NATO. So just making that point that the NATO aspirations came first. But listen, I don't think you're wrong. I don't think anybody is ever implying that like we've expanded NATO through force and that the countries who were joining, or at least the governments of the countries who were joining, didn't want it. Although in the case of Ukraine, there was a great piece in the Washington
Masses of these countries wanted it, just to be clear.
Post about this in 2006, where joining NATO was actually very unpopular, and there was a lot done. And largely,
wait, so he knows that about Ukraine, though. If he knows that about Ukraine, okay.
Because they just didn't want to take on the headache of the conflict that this might provoke. But the question, I think, isn't necessarily like, do these countries wish to join NATO? Of course, I think most countries in the world would like to join NATO. I think most countries in the world would like the most powerful government in the history of the world.
Don't try to make it seem like it's just something that anyone would want. Eastern European countries had a specific interest in joining NATO, specifically because they feared aggression from the Russian Federation. Rightfully so. That's why they wanted to join NATO. It's not just because every country would like to be part of a big military alliance, okay?
To guarantee their defense and subsidize their defense. The question is that in America's interest? And in terms of your point of seeing through the fog, I mean, look, there was, as you know well, in the 90s, in the late 90s during the first round of NATO expansion, there was a lively debate amongst this. And I don't mean a debate amongst outsiders or experts or whatever. I mean, within the real deal experts, the wisest graybeards in the national security apparatus, there was a real debate with at least 3 secretaries of defense who warned against this. Robert Gates, Robert McNamara, William Perry, the secretary of defense at the time, almost resigned, said his biggest regret in life is that he didn't resign over it. George Kennan was able to see right through that fog. He literally said, the Cold Warrior, founder of the containment strategy, saw right through that fog and goes, this will inevitably lead to a conflict with Russia. And his exact words were, and then when there's a Russian response, everybody will say, look, this is why we needed to expand NATO. But the point here is, okay, even within that deep debate, which there were lively debates about, even the people who were on the pro-expansionist side of things, like Henry Kissinger, even he said Ukraine would have to be a special arrangement. Ukraine will not come into NATO because obviously that's leading to a war with Russia. And so I don't think it's unreasonable, and I think this is a fair thing that we should do in all conflicts, is like to have, as Mearsheimer puts it, to have strategic empathy. To say like, hey, listen, let's...
The thing that's really dumb, though, is that, yeah, people might have... Sure, people said this, like... you can find all kinds of U.S. officials saying all kinds of different things. But let's say quite a few people were saying that if we expand NATO, then that might provoke Russia. Okay. Russia provokes Eastern European countries into wanting to join NATO. So what do you choose? What do you choose? Why? Why does Russia get to be angry, for one? Just morally, why does Russia get to be angry about Eastern European countries joining NATO? It's not their decision, okay? It's not their decision. Why? It's not about Russian security. NATO's never attacked Russia. Why should Russia's arbitrary security interests just decide like what other countries get to do with what alliances they join? Which is also, but even then though, just because some people predict a thing might happen, like Russia attacking Ukraine. So it's like this, people will try to do this prophecy, but in a way it's not self-fulfilling, but it's just kind of like you take something that might happen, but you ascribe it to a reason that is not linked to why it happened. So someone might say, oh yeah, I think, let me think of an analogy. Let's say there's like an abusive partner, okay? Like let's say Sally has an abusive boyfriend called Dave, right? And they're like, well, okay, Sally, I think if you don't cook Dave's meals like and have them hot when he's home from work, like he's gonna start punching you, okay? And then like he alludes to punching her a few times. He like lashes out at her a couple of times. He starts shouting at her. He maybe throws something at her at one point, and he does all this aggression and shit like that. But then eventually one day she just like, yeah, she doesn't. Oh, Dave, I didn't even do that on purpose. And then one day she hasn't cooked his food for him. He comes home and he lashes out at her, and it's like, oh, see, I was right. Like you should have. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like that was the reason that he was going to attack her, right? Maybe she does it once, but then like a week later he lashes out at her because she like looked at someone else, like looked at another guy the wrong way when they were walking down the road. Like, because if you look at Russia, the reason that Russia like attacked Ukraine and wants a piece of Ukraine is, listen to them themselves. They don't talk about NATO. There was this whole thing where Tucker Carlson tried desperately to get Putin to talk about NATO, and all Putin wanted to talk about was Oleg the Wise, Ivan the Terrible, the 1,000-year camaraderie between Russians and Ukrainians, and how they're actually the same people, and all this. That's why that happened. They'll tell you that's why it happened. So just because you excuse it with a different reason, that Russians don't use themselves, and Russians didn't need themselves to aggress on countries beforehand, because what if it turns out with Dave and Sally in this abuse situation? What if it turns out that in the past that this abusive boyfriend was actually assaulting his partners even when they did everything right, even when they didn't do anything that was advised against? Like, so let's say this abusive partner has like assaulted his partners in the past. In the same way that Russia has attacked countries and violated sovereignty, even when no one was joining NATO, like Moldova, like Georgia in the 90s. It would be like someone saying with Hitler as well, like that, yeah, that's just trying to like arbitrarily decide that not enough appeasement, that will make Hitler more aggressive, even though Hitler's already aggressing during appeasement. But then appeasement stops and he aggresses more. He's like, oh, it's because appeasement stopped. Well, no, that's not how that works. Such a like crude tactic. And again, it's one of those things, it's like West-splaining, because Dave Smith doesn't seem to care for the fact that Russian leaders, especially Putin and Russian ideologues, don't use the same rationale that Mearsheimer uses, because it doesn't suit the historical timeline. And it's just also, it's not what they believe. It's not their primary motive.
Let's reasonably place ourselves in the other person's shoes and say, how would we react if somebody was expanding their military alliance that is explicitly anti-us and is bringing it up to our borders and now is openly
up
for
to
years
our borders.
and years and years.
It was already in the Baltics, okay, since for like 20 years.
Saying that we are going to bring your largest neighbor, where you have very important strategic interests from your point of view, into our military alliance, and you are saying over and over again, this is our brightest red line. Do not do this. And then they keep flirting.
Who was saying? When was Russia saying that this is their brightest red line? Because Putin's opinions on NATO expansion fluctuated. Sometimes Putin said that it was like a big, it was a big no-no. Other times he said he didn't give a like. Other times, Putin was quite amicable towards Western relations and bilateral agreements even with like the United States. Like they shared like territorial access through Uzbekistan to allow American and troops to go through Afghanistan. Like that was a thing. America got Russia into the WTO.
With doing this over and over, then they back a street putsch that overthrows the government there. Don't you think maybe that would be a provocation?
First of all, two things. If you want that strategic empathy that I'm not an admirer of, but if you want to do that, you can do it the other way around as well, surely.
Ooh.
I mean, do the same thing with the Ukrainians.
European realism, which is that European countries have security interests, which is let's not get over by Russia ever again. And what's the best way to do that? Is that you have to join NATO.
Yes.
The Latvians and others.
Yeah, but I would never, Douglas, but my response to you was never, I can't understand why the Latvians or the Lithuanians would want to be in NATO.
Oh, it's all obfuscation. Oh, I can understand why these people wanted this, but I can understand why these people had legitimate security concerns from Russia, but I can also understand why these countries getting legitimate security concerns addressed against Russia are also a security threat to Russia. Why is that? Why is it a threat? Why is it bad for Russia's security that other countries near it are joining NATO? Is it because Russia fears NATO invading Russia or NATO assaulting Russia? No, it's because it means that Russia loses its last remnants of influence from the Soviet Union. That's what it means. That's why it did not take NATO expansion into Ukraine to get Russia to invade. It took Ukraine exercising its sovereignty away from Russia and towards Europe on the economy. That's what it took. You can maybe ask that. Why? If you understand why does Russia fear NATO on its border? Why? Are they fearing an invasion? No. Well, what are they fearing?
Right.
Yes.
Right. And I can understand why Russia thought that Ukrainian membership of NATO was a red line. I can understand that. But that wasn't why Putin.
But it's not a legitimate reason.
Yeah. And I think there's an oddity, if I can say so. Maybe this particularly comes across on the libertarian bisexual side. But I think there's an oddity of the...
Let the record show him a happily married heterosexual man.
Wow. Alex, thanks for the £5. I just don't understand how people like Dave are just 100% aligned with the Kremlin. Like, are they being paid or are they just so gullible? No, it's because it's an alternative narrative. Dave Smith is the kind of guy who his first principle is not truth, accuracy, or something that makes sense. His first principle is how do I offer something that's different to the mainstream media? That's it. That's his first principle. Because he is a libertarian edgelord who never grew out of his 14-year-old, I just watched The Matrix and Fight Club once. He might be paid as well, incidentally, but he doesn't have to be, no.
They all say that. I think there's an oddity that sometimes particularly happens on the libertarian side, which is a presumption that things only really happen in the world because we make them so. And, Russia invades Ukraine because of American policy in Eastern Europe post 1989, 1990. Something happened in the Middle East because of American policy. And I think it's a very blinkered.
The brightest of red lines is from the 2008 leaked cable from the Russian ambassador to William Burns. Niet means niet. Yeah, but this is when 2008 was when Russia was appeased. It's when the Bucharest summit ended with Ukraine and Georgia leaving without the path to membership that they were seeking.
And parochial view of things, because my experience in countries around the world is that there's a heck of a lot going on that America is frankly not really involved in.
Well, that's certainly a straw man of my position. I am not saying that America is...
But what I'm saying is, it is very, in fact, it's partly, since you very kindly raised the issue, Joe.
Your book. Oh my God.
It's one of the things
Let's go. Book.
It's one of the things I find very interesting about this with democracies, which is that it's one of the things in the nature of a liberal democracy that because we have the right to air our opinion, because we have the right to criticize our government and much more, we end up doing all of that. And there is a misapprehension people can come to, I don't know if you do, but they can come to, which is effectively we are the only force that causes action in the world. And there's a reason for that, which is that we have, thank God, a say in how liberal democracies are run and how we're governed. And we can chew over all of the disagreements that we have. But when a liberal democracy...
You can read the memo. It's online thanks to WikiLeaks. Listen, there's nothing that I trust. There's nothing that tells me that a good take is coming more than someone who has a WikiLeaks cable from me. I love those things. I'm just saying, like, because some Russians had red lines, like Russian officials had red lines over NATO, I'm telling you that those red lines were adhered to by Western powers. The Bucharest summit was literally Western powers, NATO countries, appeasing Russia. That's what that was. They were listening to those red lines, and Putin went into Georgia anyway.
He comes against a kind of rock, like a death cult, a totalitarian regime, a dictatorship, like Russia or the Iranian revolutionary government. There's always this temptation to say, to focus our attention on our own side, because we can't do a darn thing about the other one. It's a version of, the great late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said when he was ambassador to the UN. He had this great rule, it's sort of known among those who know about it as Moynihan's rule, which is he said, if you sit at the UN Human Rights Council, or any of these bodies, you would come away with the belief that the most abused people with the fewest rights in the world live in America.
Russia did not take over Transnistria. Transnistria demanded to get into Russia. It is a largely ethnic Russian population. Facts of history. Yeah, Jolly Jack. So Scotland, I don't know if you know, voted to remain in the EU. We got taken out of the EU because the rest of the country, mostly England, voted against being in the EU. That doesn't give the European Union the right to send troops into Scotland and grab it. That's not how you do any international politics. That's not how you do that. Sorry. Facts of history, retard. All right.
And other Western liberal societies. And he came because we're the ones that talk about it. If there's one incident of racism in America, the whole world knows about it. Everyone reads it. There'll be protests everywhere. If there's one incident of racism in North Korea, it's not going to make any news. And then you have on top of that the fact that the way in which despotisms and death cults and dictatorships work, the information just doesn't come out. And Moynihan's rule ended up being that it's an interesting point. He said that his rule by the end of his time at the UN was that the number of human rights violations that occur in a country happen in exactly inverse proportion to the numbers of claims of human rights violations. Because only the countries which care about it and which such things can be aired in are ever going to get it out. But the point of Moynihan's law and the warning of it is, be careful not to come away with the mistaken idea that the free...
I never said RF has the right to do it, just that it was the population themselves that demanded it, not forced by the RF. No, it's still forced by the RF because they grabbed it from another country. Transnistria was part of Moldova. And there were pro-Russian separatists in Transnistria who fought against the Moldovan government, who were also backed up by Russians from outside Transnistria who came in to help the separatists, okay? And then Russia grabbed it. Sorry, that doesn't provide anything. Because Russia does that. Because Russia grabs territory on the basis of there being ethnic Russians there so they can foment local conflicts and grab it. You're just not contributing anything. Fuck.
East and most liberal societies are the worst. And I think there's a version of Moynihan's law that applies, whether it's to the Middle East, to Ukraine and Russia, which is we come away with this, people may come away with the impression that the bad things in the world effectively all come from here. And there is...
Okay, you're actually... okay, so Jolly Jack is just trolling me now, right? Like, what do you mean by grabbed? My understanding is that the Russian military presence in Transnistria is still there, no? Transnistria is still a frozen conflict. Are you trolling me? Because they haven't formally annexed it? What the fuck, man? I'm gonna kill myself. Trolls, they're here.
Quite a lot to be said for some of that. But there's not everything to be said. Much of the world runs on a dynamic and a dynamo, which you can't do a darn thing about, other than to try to understand it.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, again, I certainly... There is truth to a lot of that, and I think that is a fascinating kind of dynamic where there is something about kind of like, I noticed this even just with my own kids. Like, it's like, and people, when you have kids and you raise them really, like you're really sweet to them and you don't hit them and you give them a good life, small things end up becoming huge, like things in their mind. Like someone pushed me at the playground and it's like, whoa, this is, whereas like the way I grew up, that would have just been kind of like a non-event. But anyway, I think
Lactoid is making the majority Russian and they voted to secede arguments for Crimea. What are some rebuttals? Very simple one is you can actually look at some polling before the annexation of Crimea. The polls fluctuated, first of all. The idea that there was a clear supermajority for secession from Ukraine is actually not all that strong. Even a majority isn't always shown in the polls. The second one is they voted to secede. Yeah, they voted to secede. Was that before or after Russia rolled tanks into Crimea? It was after, yeah. Yeah, holding a referendum like at gunpoint is not really the most representative gauge of public opinion. What were the options in the ballot again? One was leave and join Russia. The other one was go back to the 1992 Constitution of Crimea. That it's go back to the 1992 Constitution of Crimea, which basically would give the local authorities a level of independence that would allow them to go straight to Russia. So it was either yes or yes, but after a convoluted process. Those were the two options. There was no option for the status quo in the referendum ballot. To stay in part of Ukraine just as normal.
Like things in their mind. Like someone pushed me at the playground and it's like, whoa, this is, whereas like the way I grew up, that would have just been kind of like a non-event. But anyway, I think it would be certainly incorrect to assume that everything that happens bad in the world is somehow a consequence of U.S. meddling. I also think that there's people on the other side here, maybe the people who are more neocon leaning, more war hawky leaning, they have a tendency to only focus on the bad things that everybody else does and act like our policies have no impact on this.
Should be ridiculous.
So very specifically, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I'll just get two bullet points on this, and we could talk about a lot of this. But look, number one,
Okay, so now you're just lying, Jolly Jack. Yeltsin literally authorized the transfer of Russian military personnel and equipment to Transnistria. What do you mean they just did it all by themselves?
2008, as you well know, right? The Joe Biden CIA director, who was the CIA
It's an act of Russian aggression. That's all it is. It's an act of Russian aggression. Nothing you're saying stops it being an act of Russian aggression.
For the entire war up until Donald Trump just came back in. He wrote the Niet means Niet memo to Condoleezza Rice, a private cable to the then Secretary of State when he was ambassador to Russia, to let her know that this flirting with bringing Ukraine into NATO is gonna end up in a war. And by the way,
I love how he has to describe it as flirting, because he'll never say what actually happened, which is that Ukraine left Bucharest without a path to accession to NATO.
Russians don't want to do it. His words exactly. If you keep pushing with this, the Russians are going to have to make a decision that they don't want to make, which is whether they intervene or not. And number two, Stoltenberg, if I might be butchering that again, but the head of NATO, he himself said that Vladimir Putin sent him a draft treaty in late 2021 and said, look, if you just put into writing that you will not bring Ukraine into NATO, I won't invade. Now,
okay, if this was the case, because I don't believe the characterization of any of these quotes that Dave Smith he's simplified a lot of quotes to just make it, he does this with Israel-Palestine as well. All right. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Zelenskyy almost immediately said that he would take NATO off the table. He would make Ukraine a neutral country if Putin stopped invading. And that should have been, according to Dave Smith's entire worldview, that should have been game over. That should have been, okay, we got what we wanted, let's leave. They didn't do it. They didn't do it because it wasn't about NATO. It was never about NATO. Sorry.
You want to argue that...
I admire your appeal to authority to the head of the CIA.
It's not an appeal to authority.
Well,
how is that an appeal to authority?
You regard the view of the CIA director on that occasion as being useful for your argument. But secondly, secondly, there's an oddity to believing what
Dave Smith
This hasn't had an
Fuck.
economic effect.
I didn't mean to do that. Where was I? Man, Dave Smith really loves the establishment when it suits him, doesn't he? Here we are.
I admire your appeal to authority to the head of the CIA.
Hey.
I didn't
It's not an
know
appeal
that
to authority.
libertarians were-
Yes,
well,
it is.
How
It's
is
the
that an
ultimate
appeal to authority?
You regard the view of the CIA director on that occasion as being useful for your argument. But secondly,
But,
hang on, secondly, there's an oddity to believing what Vladimir Putin says.
No, wait, hold on. But you didn't let me finish my
even-
point.
okay.
So don't believe what he says. I'm not going to pretend to read his heart and mind or something like that. But at the very least, you handed him the giant excuse in order to do it. I mean,
No, they
maybe he
didn't.
doesn't really believe it, but this
What
is
was the
his
excuse?
argument to his own people and to the world.
The only excuse that was handed was a quote where someone at NATO said, Ukraine might be in NATO in the future. Ukraine has a future in NATO. That's it. Just a sentence. No path to membership, no treaties, no agreements. That's the excuse. If that's all the excuse you need to invade a country, you're probably just not a good country and need to be fought and bullied until you can become a nice country. I don't know what to say.
That it's like, look, and we put him in a position, if you hate Vladimir Putin, he's such a terrible guy, well, we put him in this position where he gets to now very plausibly say to the international community, in the same way that if the Soviet Union had survived and the United States hadn't, and they were...
He doesn't very plausibly have the opportunity to do that. He invaded Ukraine because he wanted to annex the whole country, because he was trying to pretend that the whole place had been run by Nazis.
Yep.
Well, I mean, okay, the whole place
That's
wasn't
what he
run by
told-
Nazis. There's certainly worse
This
than
I
Nazis.
thought I really
is
agree
what
with
he
that.
told the Russian people.
Yep. He said
he
there was a genocide. This is why the ICJ provisional measures. The ICJ very quickly called for an immediate ceasefire and withdrawal from Ukraine by the Russians. They called for that very quickly because the pretense for war was that Putin said that Ukraine was full of Nazis and that they were committing a genocide of ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. So all Ukraine had to do was go to the ICJ and say, we have a dispute. We're not committing genocide. And the ICJ was like, yeah, I suppose you're not. Russia, get out. That was it. It was the most simple.
Also brought up, listen, when he
you can
announced...
lie an awful lot when you're a dictator, and you have the ability not just to run all of the media, but to kill your political opponents. I mean, you can do an awful lot.
Sure.
None of this. I just got back from Ukraine again the other week, and it's so weird. I saw the Oval Office meeting as it happened from a trench in the front line between the Russian and Ukrainian positions in the east of the country.
Jesus.
And it was
Not many people
so
would say that.
weird seeing the way in which this country's territory was being talked about by outsiders, and particularly by America, because there's so many oddities about it. But the people who are fighting there, the soldiers on the front lines, the ones I was with, they're not fighting against Putin forces because of NATO expansion or anything. They're fighting because he lied to his own army, he lied to his own people, he lies to the world, and he decided he wanted to gobble up Ukraine because he wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. And as a result, these young men are in dugouts in the middle of winter, fighting Russian soldiers because the Ukrainians' homes are 30 kilometers behind them. And I think among much else, that's stuff that cannot be forgotten about. None of this is simply about NATO expansion or this or that. It's about a country whose people are suffering in their...
Why does Douglas Murray like Trump so much if he also aligns with the Russian talking point? Probably because of anti-woke and anti-Muslim and anti-trans. I don't know. But I think to be fair, recently, I think Douglas Murray has started to fall out of love with Trump a little bit. Because he's against the tariffs as well. He's been against quite a lot of what Trump's been doing recently.
Third year of war. And it's...
Did you see the IDF investigation? Yeah, it was trash. Like, absolutely the most useless piece of shit. How did it take them a month to come up with that? Me.
Almost total war. It's as much total war as we've got in the modern age. And
But that's not. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I'm not saying the Ukrainian people were fighting because they wanted to keep their country. People don't very much like being invaded by foreign countries. I understand that completely.
Wow.
And I've also always said throughout this whole thing that is their right. They have a right to do that. We as Americans have a right to, have an opinion on whether our government ought to be funding and arming the thing. But all I'm saying is that I'm not making an appeal to authority here. I'm just saying that you have the top people in the Russian government all unanimously saying, like, this is our red line. You keep flirting with NATO expansion into Ukraine. And then you have all the people at the top of NATO and at the top of the U.S. government admitting it too.
Well,
and
as I
going
say,
like, yeah, this is the whole beef. So why is it like these two things aren't mutually exclusive?
No, they aren't. But I mean, they weren't going to expand NATO to Ukraine.
Well, they kept flirting with it, and this.
No, the Ukrainians
Flirting
wanted
how?
membership,
What flirting?
And it was very unwise whenever anyone from the rest of the West even flirted with.
Didn't Kamala
none of
Harris
this-
openly say that NATO was going to join you?
Yeah, shortly before the war.
Ukraine was
Yeah.
going to join NATO?
Yeah, I never saw her as the Kissinger of our era.
Which I agreed. No, there's some area of agreement,
That's
Douglas,
Tim
that
Walz.
we can come.
He's the
he's the guy for that.
Well, obviously, that guy's the future.
Careful, isn't it?
But it is still the vice president of the United States of
sure.
America, and it's
But
it's
again,
not just.
again, that's not why Putin invaded. But
Well,
I mean,
you can
he
assert
invaded.
that,
He
but-
invaded because of the thing he's dreamt of since he falling down to the Soviet Union. Is
Do you know
wants
how he
to-
dreams?
We know a lot from.
I think it was a tweet by Harris, wasn't it? Defense of the Ukraine, but she spoke about the Ukraine, something about Ukraine and the defense of a NATO alliance. Even that was like, again, if you think someone's invading a country because of that, you're a retard. I'm sorry.
What he said and what he's done since the fall of the Soviet Union.
Just
and
listen
his
to what Putin
statements,
says. Just
certainly
listen to what
very
he says.
early on. in his
It's the same. I don't know why. It's always the same. It's like the same as arguing with these quote unquote. I'm just gonna. I don't like calling them pro-Palestine because they're not pro-Palestine. They're pro-Hamas. They're pro-Hamas. Like these Al Jazeera who will tell you every reason for why Hamas does what they do, other than actually asking the Hamas people themselves. It's the same. Like they'll give you every excuse for every action, other than what the actual people involved say themselves. Right? Yeah, the pro-Axis people. Yeah. They'll give you 10 different reasons for why Hezbollah or Hamas or whatever do what they do, but none of them actually include the words of the people in charge of the movements. Same with Russia, like Putin. Like Dave Smith will give you a million different quotes from generals and CIA people about NATO expansion, but the last thing he'll ever tell you is, what does Putin generally say about why Russia deserves Ukraine? What does he usually say?
Right, but if he does have a red line and you violate that red line, is that because he's following his dreams, or it's because
his dream is, as he's said many times, is the reconstitution of the Soviet Union's territory?
I don't think that's exactly what he said.
Yes, it is. It's exactly what he says. He said it's the collapse of the Soviet Union was the biggest catastrophe of the 20th century. He says that Ukraine is like Russia's little brother, that it's not a real country. Yeah, that's exactly what he says. What the fuck?
Times to like how great the Soviet Union was and what a tragedy it is that it collapsed and things like that. But regardless,
Something we can agree is
what
a fiction. I mean,
I think the Soviet Union collapsing is one of the greatest things that's ever happened in the history of the world. One of the most evil regimes, if not the most evil regime.
Result of American action.
Sure, there were a lot of factors in there, but yes,
throw in some pro-American views.
I will certainly concede that.
I do need to look up some of these articles. Like Putin wrote an essay on this, on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians in 2021. He says that Russia was robbed because of Ukrainian independence. He said that Kyiv doesn't need the Donbass. Why? He's literally writing essays about these aspirations. Maybe should I just read the whole thing one day and take some notes on it? Should we just stop the stream right now so I can read all of this? And we can tell you what he actually thinks about Ukraine. Why is Dave doing this? So now it's even worse. Not only is he omitting the actual words of Putin, now he's denying them. Now he's just lying about them. Why?
Us luring them into Afghanistan played a
the Bolsheviks treated the Russian people as inexhaustible material for their social experiments. They dreamt of a world revolution that would wipe out national states. That is why they were so generous in drawing borders and bestowing territorial gifts. It is no longer important what exactly the idea of the Bolshevik leaders who were chopping the country into pieces was. We can disagree about minor details, background, and logics behind certain decisions. One fact is crystal clear. Russia was robbed. Indeed. The paragraph preceding that. Therefore, modern Ukraine is entirely the product of the Soviet era. We know and remember well that it was shaped for a significant part on the lands of historical Russia. To make sure of that, it is enough to look at the boundaries of the lands reunited with the Russian state in the 17th century and the territory of the Ukrainian SSR when it left the Soviet Union. It's about history and territory and rebuilding an old empire. That's what it's about to Putin. He's not writing 5,000 word essays about NATO. It's like it's the thing. It's the thing. It's like Hamas. Again, I'll just go back to that, you know. Hamas will attack Israel. They'll tell you why they did it. They'll tell you why they're doing it. And then people in the West will tell you a different reason why they did it, right? Hamas will say, yeah, because we think that it's actually possible to destroy Israel. We think other countries and forces like Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis will join in. We see it primarily as an act to reclaim Al-Aqsa and a response to violence in Al-Aqsa. And then the West will be like, they actually did it because of occupation. And actually, they've sincerely wanted a two-state solution in the past. And they just want to end the blockade and have freedom and sovereignty and a Palestinian state within the 6-7 borders. Like, why? Wait, why are you doing that? Why are you just... It's like Dave is beating up Sally because Sally didn't cook his dinner properly. And some third party from 5,000 miles away is being like, well... I don't know. You know, actually, it's really more because of the way that she constantly flirts with her male colleagues and then brags about it to him and then says, hey, come take me on, buddy. I'm ready for it. Pum, 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 pum. Like, why are you saying that? What function do you serve? Putin is writing 5,000 word essays about how, and going to Tucker Carlson and talking about thousands of years of history about why Ukraine and Russia are one and the same and how Ukraine belongs to Russia and the borders of the Ukrainian state are completely arbitrary and they're a result of historical failures and catastrophe. And then people in the West are saying, actually, he's doing it because of NATO expansion and legitimate security concerns around the aggression against the Russian sovereign border. Why? Why do you do this? Why does this dynamic exist for multiple conflicts? This sweeping. Why do the sweepers do this?
Huge role in weakening the Soviet Union. It came with the minor little price tag of 9/11. But okay, that's but you know that's
the Soviet Union did not fall just because of Afghanistan.
No, I didn't say. I said it played a role. I didn't say it was just because of Afghanistan.
Main thing was the stationing of European troops.
Also because communism as an economic model just doesn't work, and it was a disaster, and it was destined to collapse. Like all centrally planned, totally socialist economies are destined for bad results.
I don't like the word destined in that because I mean, in my experience, things that don't work can go on an awfully long time.
Well, look, the Soviet Union went on an awfully long time. I mean, it was...
I thought when I went to North Korea some years ago, that couldn't go on for much longer, and on it goes.
Yeah, no, okay, so fair point there, but certainly it's going to be, it's a much different dynamic for a communist country like North Korea, who is a relatively small and... not expansionist, whereas the Soviet Union was trying to maintain an empire, which is a much tougher thing to do. Look, the United States of America is going broke trying to do it, so it was pretty tough for them to do. All I'm saying here is that, like...
America is actually going broke because Trump is just pressing the self-destruct button on America's economy for absolutely no reason. That's why America's going broke. It's not because of their soft power in the rest of the world.
If the dynamic, again, it's not just that, like... First off, in 2008 at the Bucharest summit, we announced we were doing it. And we didn't give them a map plan, but we announced they are coming into NATO over and over, not just the Kamala Harris comment, over and over and over again through the years. People at the highest level of the U.S. government asserted that this is going to happen, that it's a matter of time. And then 2014, this was a major provocation toward the Russians, that we backed this street protest against the democratically elected government there.
That's again, it's tricky because the Maidan protests were genuine students in the center of the city who were uprising against a corrupt government.
I'm not even arguing with that. Ukraine's a corrupt...
And that, again, it's the people of Ukraine, like other countries, I mean, they do have agency beyond what Washington.
Yeah, I'm not claiming any of those people don't have agency. I'm just claiming that Washington poured $100 million into the thing and sent our politicians over there. Our politicians openly saying, we're on your side. You have the backing of America. Look, Douglas,
but historically, America has liked to be on the side of people who desire freedom over autocracy.
When it's convenient, not so much.
Why do comments get deleted? Are mods really that fragile? No mod has deleted anything for the last, as far as I'm scrolling up. The only person that just got banned was someone who was trying to dox me. What? If your messages will be getting auto-modded. Jesus.
When it's not.
Well, yeah.
Not in Saudi Arabia, not in Egypt.
I'm glad you joined me in my dislike of the House of Saud.
Okay, fine. But look, it does attack...
I was worried for a moment there.
Yeah, but it does attack your central point there, that it's like, no, I'm sorry. See, this is my beef. My beef isn't ever with talking about the corruption or the evil things that other governments do. What I don't like is this whitewashing over our own corruption and the evil things that are... The idea that America, we have a history of just standing with the people because we love democracy so much. No. We use that as an excuse when we think it's in our strategic advantage. We will overthrow democratically elected governments with no problem, which, by the way, Yanukovych was democratically elected with elections verified by the EU. But I'm not denying any of those kids had agency.
Yeah, and there were also, and he also went against the will of the entire country and the overwhelming majority of the parliament by trying to side with the Russian deal, the Eurasian Customs Agreement over the European one. And when people protested, he ordered his police to fire on them. And then more people protested, and he got fucked. Sorry, happens. Rip.
And I'm sure a lot of them were protesting against their own corrupt government. But the point is that, look, imagine on, I think it was Jeffrey Sachs came up with this, isn't mine, but imagine on January 6th, if Chinese politicians were coming over and handing out sandwiches to the rioters and saying, we have your back. Imagine
if you had, maybe not use China, let's use another country. Oh, Russia. Imagine if you had Russian intelligence people and people from the Kremlin come into the United States to do research and then creating social media accounts where they pretended to be Americans and trying to sway public opinion with their Twitter accounts, and even some of them getting quoted as authentic American opinions in newspaper articles in the mainstream press, because that's actually what did happen. That was what was revealed in the Mueller report, that Russian Kremlin money did that. Yeah.
Listen, we would lose our collective minds if another country came in and did something.
He doesn't care about that, though. He doesn't care about Tim Pool getting funded by the Russians or that Benny Johnson guy or anything like that. He doesn't care. He doesn't give a
something like that, okay? But we lost our collective minds about Vladimir Putin installing Donald Trump, and it was all just completely made up. It wasn't even a real thing.
Oh, it was all just completely fake, yeah. Even though the Mueller report did actually produce indictments and some people went to jail, and Trump got very somewhat implied, I could say implicated in obstruction of justice to some degree. But, we never talk about that.
We didn't lose our minds on that, a certain subset of it.
It's a fact that Russia did spend money to try to sway the election. They did do that. They spent a lot of money and resources and collaborated with, what's the word, collaborated? Happened perchance to act in some completely unintended synchronization with members of the Trump campaign team. Is that a better way to put it?
Okay,
media lost their minds, yes.
For me, wasn't even a subset.
For me being
main set.
Yeah.
For me being the bisexual libertarian here, you have corrected me on my collectivism several times here, and you are right. Yes, we didn't lose our mind. I am speaking, but many other people here did. But you're pouring $100 million into a street protest against a democratically elected president of Ukraine. And the whole issue is over, essentially, whether he's going to tilt towards...
Where's the evidence that America spent $100 million on the protests? Because those protesters consisted of millions of people. What are we, protesters get $100 each or $50 each? Or is this just, we're going to conflate USAID money to institutions that help people to set up like ballot boxes and things like that. That's what I'll be referring to.
Toward an economic deal with Europe or tilt toward an economic deal with Vladimir Putin?
Tilt. It was about 390 out of 400 something votes in the Ukrainian parliament in favor of the European deal, mostly the National Endowment for Democracy. Yeah, so that's not the same as funding protesters to overthrow Yanukovych. The Americans at the time actually supported an interim government with Yanukovych still there. So even that's nonsense.
I mean, Douglas, like if anyone did that in our region of the world, DC would overthrow that government, invade in a moment. If China poured $100 million into Mexican protests and was able to overthrow the democratically elected government, what do you think DC?
Imagine if someone spent millions of pounds or dollars trying to, if a foreign country spent millions of dollars trying to sway supporting like propagandists and antagonists in the United States. Imagine that, provocateurs. Imagine if Russia just spent the money supporting people who say that Ukraine is the enemy of the United States, like Tim Pool, for example. Imagine if that happened.
To change the subject, maybe, but Qatar pours hundreds of millions of dollars into this country, billions indeed. Yeah. And tries to change policy in this country, and nobody's trying to overthrow Qatar. Nobody's trying to overthrow the emir or his family, and they've been poisoning American universities, American institutions, buying up American politicians. They pour billions into this country.
I think I just sent you something about that this morning.
Yes, I mean, well, okay, but that is a little bit different than overthrowing our neighbor government and trying to install a hostile government toward us.
You're saying that like we'd lose our mind if anyone tried to interfere here. There are lots of people.
But I wasn't saying if anyone,
and the most obvious one is Qatar, which has pours money into DC and into elite institutions and universities in this country. And I don't find from
No, I've seen this one, the one that you just sent me in Discord, the 5 billion the 5 billion number. But this 5 billion number from the NED is just for all kinds of, like, there are receipts for all of these different projects. This was the problem, that when you were coming from a centrally planned vessel state like Ukraine, going into a liberal free market democracy, then you're going to have a lot of institutional challenges. And what a lot of these funding projects were helping the country adjust to a democratic nation. So some of it was like how to stem corruption, or how to deal with drug trafficking, or how to deal with human trafficking, or how to deal with policing, or how to deal with running elections, or how to deal with running the press in a way that you can have an informed populace. That's what a lot of this money was. This money was over decades as well. This wasn't to do with, that's 5 billion since the 90s, which is cool. And there are receipts for where all of these projects went for,
Week to the next, anyone who's particularly riled up about it.
Well, so they've been, so they're pouring money into DC. Mm-hmm. And so do you think that they are influencing U.S. policy through doing that?
I think they're trying to, yeah.
Maybe they are trying to.
I don't know. They're definitely succeeding with the universities and others.
Maybe.
For sure.
They should try with the political class more if they're trying to turn us
Isn't it quite naive to believe any of that? To believe what?
Anti-Israel or something like that, because both major parties in this country will fund and unconditionally support Israel no matter what. So, I don't know.
Well, I don't know no matter what, but Qatar is definitely trying to influence things their way, as other countries are. I cite it as an example of something that's very interesting, which is an attempt to interfere.
He doesn't want to use Russia because the entire Joe Rogan audience will melt. Also, probably Murray doesn't care that much about the Russia stuff in America, because they support conservatives in the United States. Qatar supports pro-Palestine leftists.
American public life, which gets almost no attention.
Pro-Axis leftists, something like that.
Indeed, the governments, whether Democrat or Republican, still seem to adore the Qataris, even as they act as one of the backers of terrorist groups across the Middle East and elsewhere. And I cannot understand why it doesn't get more attention.
Well, according to the former defense minister of Israel, they were begging Qatar to pour that money into Hamas.
No, that's not what happened.
Well, that's what he said.
Yeah,
his words, begging.
You're referring to the funding of Hamas in the 2010s.
Yes.
Yeah, no. The Qataris poured the money in And the question on the Israeli side was what you allowed to do with funds that were going into Gaza, and the Israelis allowed the funds to go from Qatar to Gaza.
I think a little bit more than that. I think when the funds dried up, Netanyahu sent the head of the Mossad in there to beg him to keep the funds going.
Again, I'm not sure. It's like quoting the head of the CIA, quoting the head of the Mossad. Maybe. But
Maybe.
That's not the evidence of the last 18 years.
I mean, it's you can. Okay, so I mean, I guess. I think
Does Dave want to talk about why that money was going in? That the idea with spending that money in was to because they saw it as themselves rewarding periods of quiet from Hamas. Okay.
Allowed to quote powerful people when they admit what they're doing. I mean, it's kind of like
I know, but
like,
again, I mean, it's just an interesting thing because again, it's a discipline about this, which is, do I only quote powerful people when they say the odd thing that I agree with, or do I simultaneously distrust all powerful people? It's just an interesting rhetorical.
Well, no, I mean, I think that obviously, like, I don't blindly trust anyone in the political.
I think Douglas he's like seeing right through him. It's just very satisfying to watch it happen.
Class or the media class.
Yeah, he'll never quote Putin though. He'll never directly quote Putin talking about why he wants to invade Ukraine and why he thinks he's entitled to it.
For that matter either. But
Frogan.
when they admit things that are like very against their interest to admit and kind of give away the whole game that now they're pretending doesn't.
How do you know it's always against their interest? Like this head of the Mossad, even like I don't have any reason to agree or disagree with what this claim is about begging them to send more money to Hamas. Like maybe they were. Wouldn't be world changing. But how do you know that that's against his interest? How do you know the Mossad doesn't have a political issue with Netanyahu and wants to make him look bad? How do you know that's not the case? You think that Israel is a united front? They're like the farthest country from a united front in the world right now. Like everyone is in there for like, especially in Israeli government right now. Everyone is just operating for out of their own like miserable, corrupt self-interest. Everyone's blaming each other. Everyone's trying to take credit for things that they didn't do. Like, yeah, of course that something like that might happen with it's dishonest from the Mossad.
Are you sure whether it's the CIA or Mossad that it isn't just if they say something that you happen to want to be the case?
Well, this is kind of like saying if I were to end on trial and I were to, like, I'm the prosecution and I'd enter into evidence a written confession by the defendant, and you go, well, are you only entering this in because this kind of goes along with your case? Like, I suppose we're all guilty of having these incentives to some degree, but I do think it's a relevant detail that the former defense secretary admitted this. And by the way, Netanyahu's admitted this, Ehud Barak has admitted this.
They admitted that they allowed funds to go from Qatar to Hamas because Hamas was governing the Gaza.
For the reason of preventing the establishment of a Palestinian state.
No, that was not the case.
That is what Netanyahu said. That is what Ehud Barak said. No. It's all up in.
This is Netanyahu when he's in the Knesset saying that anyone who opposes a Palestinian state should support the funding of Hamas. That's true. He did say that, and that obviously makes sense. That doesn't necessarily mean that the purpose of funding Hamas was to prevent a Palestinian. As if what? Like, you think Netanyahu is out there being like, oh, I don't know, if Hamas gets replaced by Fatah, we might be forced to give them a Palestinian state. Bro, shut the f*** up. Like, just because he's using it as a form of persuasion in some context doesn't mean that was the purpose of the purpose of the funding was to stop a collapse in Gaza that might produce like a more unpredictable outcome. Because at that point, Netanyahu basically believed that Hamas could be contained and that they were a reliable government, which basically meant that, well, we're not going to give them a state, but we're also not going to be perpetually at war with them. That's basically what Netanyahu felt about Hamas. Why not replacing them and bring the PA? Because Netanyahu was never going to give a state to the PA either. If you think the support of Hamas was to prevent a Palestinian state, then why would Netanyahu also say that he opposes a Palestinian state even if Fatah are in charge? Netanyahu, the West Bank is run by the PA. It's not like the West Bank was run by the PA. It's not like Netanyahu is going to give a statehood to the West Bank, is he? He could have done. He could have been like, okay, we're going to give you more autonomy here. We're going to take some settlements out here. We're going to give you more territory here. He hasn't done any of that.
One claim, there's one recording of Netanyahu saying something along those lines. But look, I mean, we should get on. We should get onto it.
I could read you the quotes from Ehud Barak as well.
No, I know.
It's all of them have talked about it.
The situation. Let's get onto it. The situation there.
Actually, right now, even with destroy Hamas as Netanyahu's big goal, he's still saying that, like, yeah, if we're not giving it to the PA, we're not giving it to Fatah, we're not even giving it to Egypt. We're giving it to the United States, baby. That's Netanyahu's claim. That's what he wants.
Yeah, and the war of the last 18 months now, more than 18 months in the Middle East, is a result not of that, but of Hamas deciding to start another war with Israel and trying to annihilate their neighbor.
But you don't think if they were being propped up by Israel, that has nothing to do with the group? They were not
being propped up by Israel. The reason why Hamas were in power, as you know, much against the interests of the Israelis, was that they were voted into power after the Israelis withdrew from Gaza in 2005. Condoleezza Rice and other American statesfolk insisted that the Palestinians should have elections straight after the Israeli withdrawal. They had elections, perhaps unwisely, and Hamas won, and then didn't have another election again, and ruled the Gaza for 18 years until they finally got the great fruit of their labors on the 7th of October 2023, and went around southern Israel massacring everyone they could, including young people that had died.
He doesn't want a unified PA leadership, then he would not have an excuse against the Palestinian state. I mean, he would, from Netanyahu's perspective, he would, because he would just blame any act of terror. Like, what? I get it though, yeah. Like, it does suit Netanyahu to have a divided Palestinian leadership because it's easier to deal with, like, on the world stage. It's easier to say, well, look, we have no negotiating partner, and it's more convincing to your allies if that negotiating partner is Hamas. Yeah, obviously.
Dance party.
Harder if
and
it's
then cause in
Abbas.
turn the destruction of the place that they were meant to be governing. It's the whole thing is a great tragedy, and all of it is at the feet of Hamas.
I certainly agree with you that it's a great tragedy, and I do, I think it's when you accuse me of using the quotes that kind of back up what I believe, I think it's very convenient here to remove all responsibility from the Israelis. Like, even if I'm telling you that you have these quotes, I mean, I'm not talking about fringe figures. We could read through the list of people who have admitted what the strategy was with them funding Hamas and propping them up. But hold on, let me just say, so if you're going to tell me Israel props up this terrorist organization in order to kill the peace process, in order to make sure that the international community gives them a no one. By the way, Smotrich, right? The finance minister, okay? He's on record. He's on record saying, look, Hamas is an asset. The Palestinian Authority, they're the liability. Hamas is an asset because we can tell the international community, well, look, what do you want us to do? There's a terrorist organization here. We can't do business with them. And then even Ehud Barak admitted, like, this was also so that liberal Israelis, if it was the Palestinian Authority, they'd be like, hey, we should make a deal with them. But since it's Hamas, they can't. Okay, so if Israel props up this terrorist organization and then as a response to them committing a horrific act of terrorism, decides to level the entire place and just slaughter women and children in large numbers.
It didn't decide to do that, and it didn't do that. But, yeah.
It didn't level the place. Hasn't been destroyed.
Gaza is pretty leveled by now.
Yeah.
But it did not go in to level the place like that. No.
Okay, they went in and leveled the place, but that wasn't their intention.
Let's just go
I'm
back.
going to despise the Israel conversation here because I don't really disagree with both of them. Fuck.